Welcome back, everyone. This is Paranormal M, and I'm glad you're here for another video. Before we start, turn on notifications if you want to catch the next upload, and if you like tonight's stories, please leave a like. We're starting with a story from someone who lived in a cozy old house in the Essex countryside with their family. Strange noises were normal there at first, but eventually, the things they heard and saw became much harder to ignore. So let's get into it, and I hope you all have a good night's sleep. A few years back, my family and I were living in this old cottage out in the Suffolk countryside. It was the kind of place that looked peaceful from the outside, all quiet lanes and fields, but inside, it had its own little orchestra of creaks, knocks, and groans. At first, we didn't think much of it. Old house, old pipes, old floorboards. You tell yourself these things because it's easier than admitting the sounds are starting to feel intentional. But after a while, the creaks became footsteps. The tapping started happening at strange times, and every now and then, there were whispers. Not clear enough to make out words, but clear enough to make your skin tighten. One night, I was downstairs watching telly with my dad. We'd both had a couple of beers, and everyone else was asleep upstairs. My mom, my little brother, and my baby sister were all in bed. Then suddenly, we heard someone come thundering down the stairs. I mean, properly loud. Heavy footsteps, quick and urgent. We both looked toward the hallway, assuming someone had woken up and rushed down to use the bathroom. The downstairs toilet door slammed shut and the light clicked on. So we just sat there for a second thinking, right, fair enough. My dad, being my dad, called out jokingly, "You all right in there?" No answer. Then he called my mom's name. Nothing. Then my brother's. Still nothing. After about a minute, the silence started to feel wrong. So we got up and went over to the bathroom door. My dad knocked, called out again, and when nobody replied, he opened it. There was nobody inside. The light was on. The room was empty. And the thing is, in that house, you couldn't move quietly. The stairs creaked if you breathed near them. The floorboards complained about everything. There was no way someone had gone back upstairs without us hearing. That was the first time I remember thinking, okay, something is not right here. Another time, I was upstairs in my bedroom getting ready to go down. I sat on the edge of the bed, facing my TV, which was turned off. The black screen was reflecting the room behind me. And then, I saw it. Next to my reflection, just for a second or two, there was a woman. Not detailed, not like a full person standing there, but a dark female shape. She moved away from me and disappeared. What really unsettled me was that I didn't just see it in the TV. I also caught the same movement in the corner of my eye. If it had only been the reflection, I could have told myself it was a trick of the light. If it had only been the corner of my eye, I could have blamed my imagination. But both at once? That frightened me. When I told my mom, she went quiet. Then she admitted she'd seen something similar in her own room, but she'd convinced herself it was just her shadow. Later on, I moved out of the upstairs bedroom I shared with my brother and started sleeping in a small room downstairs, just off the living room. It had originally been the room where we dumped shoes, coats, and random bits we didn't know what to do with. From the very first night in there, everything felt different. I'd see shadows shifting where they shouldn't be. I'd hear footsteps when everyone was asleep. Sometimes there were whispers right near the bed. The light would flicker. I'd feel little touches on my arm or shoulder, soft but unmistakable. Most nights, I slept with the covers pulled right up, trying not to move, because I had this constant feeling that someone was standing there, watching me. The worst night happened when I was just starting to drift off. My bed was right beside the window, and suddenly I heard tapping on the glass. It was close, less than a meter from my face, and it wasn't regular like a branch in the wind. It had pauses. It felt deliberate, human. I froze. Then I heard what sounded like a finger dragging slowly down the window. That was it for me. I pulled the blankets over my head and stayed completely still. I must have stayed like that for 10 minutes, barely breathing. Eventually, the tapping stopped. Then I heard footsteps inside the room, moving from the door toward the side of my bed. The door hadn't opened. I know it hadn't, because I would have heard it. And honestly, I couldn't decide which was worse. Thinking someone was in the room with me, or knowing something had entered without using the door. Now, I know people can say it was imagination, stress, an old house playing tricks. And honestly, I tried to tell myself the same thing for a long time. But the thing that really sealed it for me happened when we were arranging a house swap. We wanted to move closer to town, and a couple came round to view our place. While they were there, I jokingly said to my mom, "Should I tell them about what's been happening here?" She immediately shushed me. But the woman visiting us looked straight at me, and her face changed. It was like she already knew. She said, "Are you seeing a ghost?" My stomach dropped. I laughed nervously and said yes. Then she asked, "Is it a woman? An older woman?" That stopped me cold, because the figure I'd seen, the one in the TV reflection, the one I felt around that downstairs room, had always seemed like a woman. Older, slow-moving, slightly hunched. It turned out this woman considered herself sensitive to spirits. I've always been skeptical about that sort of thing, and I still don't believe everything people claim. But she described what I'd been seeing without me giving her any details at all. She told me the spirit wasn't there to hurt anyone. She said she felt calm, not angry, and that I didn't need to be afraid of her. About 6 months after we moved, that same woman contacted my mom. She'd done some research into the house and found out that an elderly woman had died there years earlier. And the room she died in? It was the little downstairs room I'd moved into. I used to think ghosts were something people wanted to believe in, or something you only heard about in stories. But after living in that house, after hearing what we heard, seeing what we saw, and then having a complete stranger describe her so clearly, I don't feel skeptical anymore. I believe some places hold on to people, and I think it's very easy to dismiss the paranormal until one night, in the dark, it quietly introduces itself. I want to tell you about the night I almost didn't come home. It was raining so hard that evening that the whole city looked blurred, like someone had dragged their hand across wet paint. I was standing outside this tall office building downtown, under a narrow awning, watching headlights smear across the streets below. My name is Clara Hallowell, and at that point in my life, I was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. I had just finished a brutal business trip. 5 days, 3 cities, one meeting after another. Conference rooms that were always too cold. People smiling politely while talking about numbers big enough to stop feeling real. Everyone kept congratulating me because the deal had closed, but honestly, I didn't feel proud. I just felt hollow. My phone kept buzzing in my hand. Emails, missed calls, calendar alerts. It felt like my entire life had become a machine that never stopped asking for more. Then, while I was standing there in the rain, I felt this sharp pressure in my chest. It was quick, but it scared me. I leaned against the side of the building and waited for it to pass. And of course, I did what I always did. I explained it away. Stress, too much coffee, not enough sleep. Just another warning light on a dashboard I refused to look at. A rideshare pulled up a minute later. The driver was an older man with silver hair, soft eyes, and jazz playing quietly through the speakers. I climbed into the back seat, and the warmth of the car almost made me cry. He asked, Airport? I nodded and said, please. The ride was peaceful in that strange, late-night way. Rain sliding down the windows, neon signs bending into ribbons, the city moving around us, tired but still awake. At one red light, I closed my eyes for just a second and woke up with a jolt when the car started moving again. That pressure came back in my chest. Not sharp this time, heavy, deep. The driver glanced at me in the mirror and asked, "You okay back there?" I forced a smile and said, "Just tired." And I believed that. I really did. When we reached the airport, everything looked normal. Bright lights, crowds, rolling suitcases, crying kids, business travelers hunched over laptops, coffee smells drifting through the air, announcements echoing from the ceiling. I checked my boarding pass. Gate C-17. Final flight home. I bought water and called my younger sister, Natalia, mostly because I was afraid I'd fall asleep standing up. She answered right away and said, "So, did they finally let you out of the corporate dungeon?" I laughed, but it came out weak. She could hear it immediately. She said, "Clara, you sound awful." And I told her, "I feel awful." She got quiet for a second, then said, "You've been running yourself into the ground for months." I leaned against the wall near my gate and rubbed my chest again because that ache was back. I told her, "I just need sleep." She said, "Promise me you'll take care of yourself when you get home." And I said, "I promise." Then boarding was called. I hung up, grabbed my bag, and got in line. Everything still felt ordinary. That's what I remember most. A father rocking a sleeping child on his shoulder. 2 students arguing about seats. A woman complaining into her phone about a missed connection. Just normal airport chaos. The flight attendant at the door smiled and said, "Welcome aboard." I stepped into the plane and stopped. The cabin was empty. Completely empty. No passengers, no luggage, no crew. Every seat was vacant under dim overhead lights. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. Maybe I had boarded too early. Maybe everyone was delayed at the gate. Maybe the crew had stepped away. But then I turned around. The jet bridge door slowly closed by itself. The flight attendant was gone. I called out, "Hello?" No one answered. The lights flickered. Then every window turned black. Not nighttime black. Not storm cloud black. I mean absolute darkness, like the whole world outside the plane had been erased. That was when I really started to panic. I ran back to the door and pulled the handle. Locked. I pounded on it and yelled, "Open the door!" But the sound didn't travel. It felt like the plane swallowed my voice. I looked through the little window in the door. The jet bridge was gone. No airport, no runway, no lights. Only darkness pressing against the plane from every side. My hands were shaking when I grabbed my phone. The screen flickered with static, then died completely. And then I heard it. Clack. It came from the front of the plane, from near the cockpit. Clack. Wet. Sharp. Wrong. I knew I should run, but fear can do strange things to you. Sometimes it freezes you. Sometimes it pulls you closer to the thing you know you shouldn't see. I walked toward the cockpit slowly. The lights flickered harder. Something inside breathed, not like a person, like an animal smelling the air. I was only a few steps away when the cockpit door slammed open, and something came out. I still struggle to describe it. It had the shape of a body, but not a human one. Its limbs were too long and bent in places they shouldn't. Its skin looked black and wet, stretched tight over broken bones. Its head tilted sideways with this awful cracking sound. Then 2 red eyes opened in the dark of its face. It sniffed the air. Then its head snapped toward me. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just took over. I sprinted down the aisle while that thing screamed behind me, a sound so loud the seats shook. I threw myself into the lavatory and locked the door right before something slammed against the wall outside. The whole room shook. I crouched on the floor with both hands over my mouth, trying not to make a sound. Outside, I heard claws dragging along the walls. Scrape. Scrape. Then sniffing. Right outside the door. The handle twitched once. I stopped breathing. It stayed there for what felt like forever. Then the footsteps moved away. For a few minutes, there was silence. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It felt alive. It felt like the plane itself was listening. I told myself, this isn't real. This can't be real. Eventually, I opened the door. The aisle was empty. I stepped out carefully, looking between the rows of seats, trying to think. And then something rose from behind the seats beside me. A black arm wrapped around my waist and slammed me into the cabin wall. The creature's face was inches from mine. Its mouth opened too wide, full of jagged teeth. It smelled like rot and burned metal. It started dragging me toward the back of the plane. I screamed and fought. I kicked as hard as I could, and somehow it loosened its grip. I grabbed a metal tray from one of the seats and smashed it into the side of its face. It screamed. I ran again, but now there were more of them. One crawled up from beneath the seats in front of me, smaller than the first, thin and twisted, moving on limbs that bent like spider legs. I kicked it in the face without stopping. I felt something crack, and it flew sideways into the seats. The plane started changing around me. The aisle stretched too long. Shadows moved where nothing should move. The walls looked like they were pulsing, almost breathing. Overhead bins burst open. Bags crashed down. Red emergency lights flashed, and everywhere I looked, more creatures were appearing. Some crawled across the ceiling. Some unfolded themselves from between the rows. All of them had those glowing eyes. I reached the rear galley and saw a hatch in the floor. Cargo access. I didn't think. I opened it, climbed down, and pulled it almost shut above me. The cargo hold was freezing. It was dark and huge, filled with containers and luggage stacked in endless rows. Above me, I could hear the creatures moving through the cabin. Claws scraping, heavy footsteps, sniffing. They were looking for me. I moved deeper into the cargo hold and found a small maintenance door near the landing gear compartment. I opened it. Wind hit me so hard I almost fell backward. I could see the plane's massive wheels, the metal struts, flashing red lights. But beneath the wheels, there was no ground, no runway, no earth, only endless blackness. And from somewhere far below, I heard voices, screaming, thousands of them, buried in the dark. That was when I understood something was terribly, terribly wrong. This wasn't just a plane. This was somewhere else. Then I heard a metallic clang behind me. Something had entered the cargo hold. I turned. 2 red eyes appeared between the containers, then another pair, then more. They came slowly at first, almost like they were enjoying how afraid I was. The largest creature ducked beneath the metal beams, its body scraping against the ceiling. Smaller ones crawled along the walls and above me. I backed toward the open landing gear compartment, trapped between the monsters and the void. I grabbed a loose tool from the wall and threw it. It hit a container uselessly. The creatures charged. Something grabbed my ankle. I fell hard against the metal floor, and they dragged me back into the darkness. I clawed at the floor until my nails tore. I screamed. I kicked. I begged. But they kept pulling me. Then everything stopped. They threw me onto my back in the center of the cargo hold, 5 of them surrounded me. The biggest one lowered itself over me, its red eyes staring into mine. Another pinned my wrists. Another grabbed my legs. I said, "Please." And the awful thing was, they seemed curious about my fear. Then the pain started. Claws dragged across my skin. Slowly, carefully, I screamed, but one of them pressed a cold hand over my mouth. I couldn't breathe. The largest creature brought its clawed hand to the center of my chest and pressed. I felt pressure so deep and terrible that my whole body went rigid. Its claws sank into me. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds impossible. But in that nightmare, I felt it reach inside my chest. Then it found my heart and squeezed. The world started shaking. The cargo hold flickered between darkness and blinding white light. The creatures screamed, but their voices began to fade beneath another sound. Beeping. Steady. Sharp. Beep, beep, beep. Then I heard human voices. "Charge it again! She's crashing! Move!" The plane began tearing apart around me. White light cracked through the walls. The creatures burned away into ash, screaming as they disappeared. And then I heard someone shout, "We got her back!" I woke up choking. Air rushed into my lungs like fire. I was on the floor of the airport terminal, staring up at fluorescent lights. Paramedics were over me. People were shouting. Machines were beeping. An oxygen mask covered my face. My chest felt crushed. A paramedic leaned close and said, "Stay with us. You're okay. You had a massive heart attack. Your heart stopped for several minutes." My heart stopped. I looked around and saw travelers standing behind security barriers near gate C-17. Some had their hands over their mouths. Some were crying. Some just stared. My phone was on the floor nearby. The screen still showed Natalia's missed call. And all at once, I understood. The empty plane, the locked doors, the darkness outside the windows, the monsters, the thing reaching into my chest. That was death. Or maybe it was my mind trying to understand death while strangers fought to pull me back. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know what it taught me. For years, I had treated myself like something disposable. I worked until I was numb. I ignored every warning sign. I told myself I'd rest later, live later, call people back later. And then later almost didn't come. Death didn't feel peaceful to me. It felt cold, lonely, endless. Like boarding a flight with no destination and realizing too late that no one was coming with you. I started crying under that oxygen mask. Not because I had seen monsters. Not because I was afraid. I cried because I was alive. Because rain was still falling outside the airport windows. Because strangers had fought for me. Because my sister was still there to call back. Because after years of barely living, I finally understood something simple and enormous. I didn't want to disappear. I wanted to live. I grew up in a little town way up in northern Maine. There were maybe 850 people there, give or take. It was the kind of place where folks didn't need to see who was coming down the road. They could tell by the sound of the engine. But the strangest thing about that town wasn't how small it was. It was what everyone called the quiet hour. Every night, at exactly 1:17 in the morning, the entire town shut itself away for 1 full hour. Doors locked, curtains closed, lights off. No phones, no talking near windows, no peeking outside. When I was a kid, I figured it was just one of those old local traditions nobody questioned anymore. A small town superstition with dust on it. But whenever I asked about it, the adults always gave me the same answer. Some things only know you're there once you pay attention to them. And that was it. Nobody ever explained more. A few weeks ago, my mother passed away, and I came back home to sort through her house before putting it up for sale. I hadn't been back in 13 years. Honestly, I'd almost forgotten the quiet hour was ever a thing. Until my first night there. At 1:14 a.m., my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a town emergency alert. Quiet hour begins in 3 minutes. Lock every entrance. Do not look outside. I actually laughed when I saw it. I thought maybe the town had turned the old warning into some official little ritual, like a creepy neighborhood curfew. Then, all at once, every light on the street went out. Not one porch light stayed on. The whole town dropped into darkness like someone had thrown a blanket over it. And then I heard footsteps. Slow ones, heavy, wet, right outside my house. I stood there by the kitchen window, completely still, telling myself it had to be someone messing with me. Maybe a couple of kids who knew I was back in town. Then something touched the glass. Not a knock, more like a fingernail. It dragged down the window slowly, from top to bottom. I knew better. I really did. All my life I had heard the same warning. Don't look outside during quiet hour. But I moved the blind just enough to see. There was someone standing in my front yard. A woman, I think. She was wearing a long gray dress, soaked dark around the bottom like she had just walked out of a lake. Her hair covered her whole face, but the part that made my body go cold was how tall she was. She was far too tall. Her head almost reached the lowest branches of the maple tree in the yard, and she wasn't moving at all. Then my phone buzzed again. Another alert. Do not let them see you watching. The second my screen lit up, her head snapped toward the window. I dropped to the floor so fast I hit my shoulder on the cabinet. And then she started running. Not at the house. Around it. Fast, splashing footsteps circled the walls again and again. Fingernails scraped along the siding. Windows trembled in their frames. At one point, something laughed softly from just outside the bedroom wall. I stayed curled up on the kitchen floor with my hands over my mouth, trying not to make a sound. Then I heard my mother's voice upstairs. "Emmett?" I stopped breathing. My mother had been gone for 3 weeks. "Emmett, come upstairs, sweetheart." It was her voice exactly. Not close, not similar. Hers. And for one terrible second, I almost answered. That's the part I still hate thinking about. Some tired, grieving piece of me believed it. Wanted to believe it. Then I remembered something my grandfather once told me when I was little. They only sound human when you miss someone badly enough. Above me, a floorboard creaked. Something was walking down the upstairs hallway. Then it stopped directly over my head. Everything went quiet. And then, right beside the kitchen window, something whispered. He looked at me. Not you looked. He looked. Like it was telling someone else. A moment later, every dog in town began screaming. Not barking, screaming. And somewhere beyond the house, dozens of footsteps started racing through the streets at the same time. I don't remember much after that. I crawled under the kitchen table, covered my ears, and stayed there until the room finally began to turn gray with early morning light. At exactly 2:17 a.m., everything stopped. No footsteps, no voices, no scratching, nothing. The next morning, the town acted like nothing had happened. People waved from their driveways. The diner opened right on time. Someone was sweeping the sidewalk outside the hardware store. It was all so normal it felt insulting. Finally, I asked the cashier at the diner, an older woman named Nora, what the quiet hour really was. She stared at me for a long time. Then she said very softly, "You looked outside, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Her face changed immediately. She reached beneath the counter and handed me a folded sheet of paper. It was a list of names. Hundreds of them. Every person in town who had ever looked outside during quiet hour. Beside each name was a date, and beside some of the dates, written in red ink, were the words, "Heard family afterward." I found my grandfather's name near the bottom, then my mother's. Before I could ask another question, Nora leaned in and whispered, "You have to leave before tonight." I asked her what would happen if I stayed. She looked past me, toward the black line of trees behind the diner. Then she said, "They won't wait for the dark anymore." I've had more than a few strange things happen to me over the years. Paranormal things, I guess you'd call them. They don't happen as much now, thankfully, but when I was younger, it felt almost normal in my house. And the thing is, it wasn't only me. My family saw things too. The first time I really remember being terrified by it, I was about 13. I was home alone for just a little while. My mom had gone out of state to watch my older brother play in a college baseball game. My oldest brother was away with the military, and my dad had taken my little sister to dance practice. He was only supposed to be gone for maybe an hour, so nobody thought much of it. I was a responsible kid. I kept the doors locked, didn't answer if someone knocked, and mostly just stayed out of trouble. I was sitting in the kitchen on the family computer, probably playing some random game or messing around online, when I heard footsteps upstairs. They started in my bedroom. Then they moved slowly across the landing, then toward my parents' room. I remember just freezing for a second because I knew nobody else was supposed to be home. But being young and trying to convince myself it was nothing, I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The answer I got was my parents' bedroom door slamming shut. Not closing, slamming. The next second, all three of our animals came tearing down the stairs like something had chased them. Max, our older dog, ran straight to me and stood in front of me, growling into the hallway. Buddy, our other dog, was shaking by the back door, whining like he wanted out. And my cat, Milo, was right beside him with his fur standing straight up, hissing toward the stairs. That's when I knew something was very wrong. My parents' bedroom was right above the kitchen, and I could hear whatever it was walking around up there. Then it got louder. It sounded like furniture being shoved, things being knocked over, maybe even glass breaking. It was like someone was tearing the room apart in a rage. I didn't even think. I grabbed my phone, ran out the back door, and hid behind the outdoor couch on the deck, with both dogs and the cat crowded around me. I called my dad and told him there was someone in the house. I remember how his voice changed immediately. He asked me where I was, told me to stay outside, and said he was coming home right away. I could hear the car speeding up through the phone. He must have been close because within a couple of minutes, he came flying into the driveway and ran through the kitchen door. My sister was with him, and he told both of us to stay outside while he checked the house. Of course, because we were kids and apparently had no survival instinct, we followed him in anyway. We stood at the bottom of the stairs while he went up and checked every room. When he came back down, he looked confused. There was no sign of anyone. No broken window, no open door, nothing missing, nothing out of place. I didn't believe him, so I ran upstairs and looked in my parents' room myself. And he was right. Everything was exactly where it should have been. That should have made me feel better. It didn't, because when I turned around, there was something standing at the end of the hallway. It was tall, too tall. Its head was bent sideways in this awful, unnatural way, like it had to drag against the ceiling just to fit there. It looked like a shadow, but darker than the hallway around it. And it had these bright yellow eyes. It was wearing a black hat too, like an old-fashioned top hat. Its arms hung down almost to its knees. And then, it smiled at me. I couldn't see teeth. I couldn't even really see a face, just that dark shape in those eyes. But I know it smiled. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there staring at it, completely frozen. Then my sister called my name from downstairs, and I looked away for maybe 1 second. When I looked back, it was gone. That wasn't the last time I saw it either. There were other moments after that. Sometimes I could see it clearly. Sometimes I could only feel it nearby, like the room had gone heavy and wrong. I know how it sounds. I really do. But I swear this happened. And honestly, even now, thinking about it still makes my skin crawl. That thing is the reason I still hate being alone in the dark. You know, I didn't believe in any of this until a few years ago. I mean, I was really against it. Not just casually skeptical either. I was the kind of person who'd see a paranormal video online and immediately think, yeah, no, that's fake. I'd roll my eyes at the comments, at the dramatic music, at people claiming they heard voices in old buildings. Funny thing is, I also never really put myself in situations where I might experience anything strange. I wasn't going into abandoned hospitals or old hotels or forgotten places at the edge of town. I wasn't exploring the way I do now. So honestly, it was easy for me to dismiss everything from the comfort of a normal, well-lit room. Then, I started urban exploring. At first, the strange stuff was easy to ignore. A tap in the distance. A scrape from somewhere I couldn't see. A soft movement in a place that was supposed to be empty. I'd tell myself it was the wind, or pipes settling, or an animal hiding somewhere in the dark. And maybe, part of me needed it to be those things. But over time, it started happening too often, too clearly. I'd hear something, stop, listen, and feel this little cold thought crawl up the back of my mind. What was that? There was one day that really shifted something for me. I was inside an old drainage tunnel with my friend Callan. The place was damp, echoey, and so still it almost felt sealed away from the rest of the world. We were walking slowly, trying not to slip, when I heard this low whisper. Not quite a voice, not quite a whistle. It came from farther down the tunnel, where our lights barely reached. And for the first time, I didn't laugh it off. I just stood there, staring into that darkness, and thought, what if? That was the moment I made a deal with myself. From then on, if I heard something strange or saw something I couldn't explain, I wasn't going to brush it aside anymore. I was going to check. I was going to ask questions. I was going to walk toward the sound instead of pretending I hadn't heard it. If something was there, I wanted to know. And I swear, once I made that decision, it was like the whole world got louder. I started hearing things that made no sense, seeing movement where nobody should have been, catching sounds in places that had been abandoned for years. And because I go exploring once or twice a week, I kept putting myself back into these situations again and again. Eventually, I couldn't just call all of it coincidence. That's when I started believing there might really be something there. Spirits, energy, whatever word you want to use. I don't claim to have the perfect answer. I just know that after enough unexplained moments, something in me changed. And once I believed, I couldn't leave it alone. I didn't want to just say, okay, ghosts exist, and move on with my life. I wanted to understand. I wanted the how, the why, the who, all of it. That curiosity is actually what pushed me toward quantum mechanics. I even took a few beginner quantum physics classes back at college, mostly because I wanted some kind of framework for the strange things I'd experienced. And what I learned didn't exactly explain the paranormal. It made it stranger. It made me feel less like, now I understand everything, and more like, of course reality is weirder than we think. Take quantum entanglement, for example. Two particles can become connected in such a way that they seem to share information instantly, no matter how far apart they are. You could separate them by a huge distance, and somehow, what happens to one is tied to the other. That idea alone bends my brain. We're talking about something faster than sound, faster than a Wi-Fi signal, faster than light in the way we normally understand communication. Scientists can describe parts of it, sure, but there's still this deep mystery underneath it. How does one particle know what's happening to the other? I'm not saying quantum physics proves ghosts. I'm saying the universe is already doing things that sound impossible when you first hear about them. So when people tell me spirits or paranormal experiences are too strange to be real, I don't dismiss them the way I used to. Not anymore. Because after being in those tunnels, those empty buildings, those rooms where the air changes for no reason, I've learned something. Reality has corners we haven't lit up yet. And sometimes, when you step into one of those dark corners and listen closely, something listens back. I want to start by saying that I've had vivid nightmares for as long as I can remember. Some of them felt paranormal. Some of them, honestly, I've tried to explain away as childhood imagination. And I know dreams can be strange, especially when you're young. But there's one dream that still gives me chills now, even though I'm almost 30. When I was around 6, I had this nightmare about a man coming to take me from my childhood home. In the dream, someone knocked on the front door. I answered it, and there was a man standing there. I didn't know him, but something about him felt immediately wrong. He reached for me, and I slammed the door shut. But the deadbolt was sticking out, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get it to slide back in. So I kept opening the door just enough to slam it at him again and again, hoping it would scare him or stop him from grabbing me. Then, somehow, he wasn't at the door anymore. I opened it one more time, and I saw him climbing one of the tall trees outside my brother's upstairs bedroom window. I panicked and tried harder to fix the lock, but he came back down, forced the door open, and got inside. I ran through the entryway toward the stairs, but he caught me before I could get away. He covered my mouth and made me promise not to scream. I promised. But the second he moved his hand, I screamed anyway. The worst part was that my family was home in the dream. My parents were there. My siblings were there. And no one came. Not one person. I woke up crying because I was so scared this man was going to take me from my house. And this was before my parents had told us they were getting divorced. About a year later, they finally sat us down and told us. A few months after that, our childhood home went into foreclosure. One morning, I opened the door, and the man standing there was the same man from my dream. The same face, the same feeling, the same person. He was there to evict us. I still don't know how to explain that. I had never met him before. I had no reason to know who he was. But I had dreamed about him coming to take me from that house before any of us knew we were going to lose it. There were other moments too. One summer, when I was about 8, I stayed with my aunt and uncle. I usually fell asleep on their couch with the TV on. One night, I woke up and saw the outline of a woman sitting near my aunt's basket of yarn. She was completely dark, like a shadow, but very clear. I could see the shape of her head and the high bun in her hair. I remember sitting there frozen, trying to be logical. I looked around for anything that could be casting that shadow. A lamp, the TV, something outside, anything. But nothing made sense. I sat there for several minutes, too scared to move, staring at her while she just sat there. Eventually, I worked up enough courage to run into my aunt and uncle's room. I told them there was a woman in the living room. My uncle came out to check, and she was gone. Not changed into another shadow, not explained by a chair or a pile of blankets. Gone. That whole corner of the room looked lighter. Of course, I was 8, so everyone told me it was probably in my head. But I know what I saw. The last really intense experience happened when I was around 12 at my dad's house. We were renting a place in a nice neighborhood, and it was a newer house, so it wasn't some old creaky place with a history attached to it. But I never slept well there. Almost every night, I'd wake up sometime around 3 or 3:30 in the morning. I'd feel this heaviness in my room, like the dark itself had weight. If the TV was off, I'd get this awful rush of fear and race to turn on the light. There were plenty of nights when I pretended to fall asleep in the living room just so I wouldn't have to sleep in my bedroom. Then one night, everything came to a point. We had just gotten home from dinner, and the hallway light was on. I opened my bedroom door, and the light from the hall stretched shadows across my room. I could see my own shadow in front of me. I could see the shadow of the door on the wall. But then I saw another shadow. It looked like a child standing at the end of my bed, playing with the canopy. And the canopy was moving. That was what made me feel almost relieved in the middle of being terrified, because I thought, finally, I can prove this. I'm not imagining it. Something is actually moving. I ran and got my dad. When we came back, the shadow was still there. The canopy was still moving. But my dad insisted he couldn't see what I was talking about. He said the fan was probably moving the canopy. Then he turned on the light, and we both watched the fan start spinning only after the light came on. That same night, I woke up around 3 again, and I had this overwhelming feeling that something was watching me. My brother's room was across the hall, so I tried to call out for him. But the second I tried to yell, it felt like a sudden gust of wind hit me square in the chest. I couldn't breathe. I sat up, terrified, and tried again. It happened again. So I just sat there in bed, wide awake, waiting for the sun to come up. Since then, things have been smaller and more random. I don't feel like one specific thing has followed me everywhere, but strange things still happen once in a while. Sometimes I'll swear I heard someone call my name, even though my name is unusual enough that I don't usually mistake it for other words. Other times, something I haven't touched in hours will suddenly fall from the place I left it. And within the last year, I've started having sleep paralysis. I know a lot of people see shadow figures or monsters during sleep paralysis, but mine feels different. Whatever is there feels like it's hiding, like it's just around a corner, or watching me through a door that's barely cracked open. I've spent most of my life trying to explain these things away, but some memories don't fade. They stay sharp. And this one, all these years later, still feels like it's staring back at me. I honestly believe the house I grew up in is haunted. And I know how that sounds. I know most people hear that and immediately start looking for a normal explanation. Trust me, I've done the same thing for years. I've tried to talk myself out of it, tried to blame my imagination, old pipes, shadows, stress, anything. But there are some things that just don't fit neatly into a normal explanation. When I was little, weird things were already happening around me. My mom used to find me awake in the middle of the night, sitting in the same place, just staring at the wall and talking like someone was sitting right there in front of me. She would ask me who I was talking to, and apparently I'd just say something like, "They're listening." I don't remember every detail of that, but I remember the feeling of the house, especially the basement. I hated that basement from the time I was old enough to understand what fear was. It wasn't just that it was dark or cold or creepy in the way basements usually are. It felt wrong down there, heavy, mean, like the air had weight to it. I never felt alone in that room, not once. Sometimes things would fall over when nobody was near them. Other times, I'd see something move fast out of the corner of my eye, like a person sprinting past me. But when I turned to look, there was never anything there. As I got older, it didn't stop. It actually got worse. One night, I was half asleep on the couch with my friend Dana beside me. I was just drifting off when I felt someone lift a small section of my hair and gently pull it. Not hard, but enough that I absolutely felt it. I whipped around, fully expecting somebody to be standing behind me. There was no one there. That was the kind of thing that made me feel crazy, because it was so small, but so physical. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a shadow. I felt it. And then there were the figures. I've seen shadowy shapes in that house for most of my life. For a long time, I told myself they were just tricks of the light. But the thing is, one of them was always the same. Same shape, same height, same awful stillness. The first time I saw it clearly, I was lying in bed at night with my door open. Across the hallway, near the doorway to the spare room, there was this tall, black figure standing there. It was huge, too tall, so thin it looked stretched out, like something pretending to be human but not getting the proportions right. It seemed like it had to hunch just to fit under the ceiling. I remember lying there frozen, trying not to breathe too loudly. The next morning, I told my dad about it. Now, my dad does not believe in ghosts. He doesn't believe in spirits, hauntings, any of it. He's always been the "there's a logical answer for everything" kind of person. But when I described what I saw, he went quiet. Then he told me he'd seen the same thing before. He tried to brush it off and said it was probably light from outside, or his eyes playing tricks on him, but I could tell he didn't fully believe that either. He just didn't want to admit it. There were other things too. One night, I walked into my bedroom while the lights were off and saw something black crawling across my floor. It moved fast, low to the ground. At first, I thought it was one of our dogs, but then it slipped under my bed. That made no sense. Our dogs are big. There is no way either of them could fit under there. Still, I called their names. Both dogs came running in from the living room. So whatever went under my bed, it wasn't them. But the worst thing that ever happened was when my sister Leah and I were home alone. She kept coming into the kitchen looking nervous, and I finally asked her what was wrong. She told me she could hear footsteps near the stairs. She said it sounded like someone was slowly walking toward them. I didn't believe her at first. I thought she was letting the house scare her. Then I went quiet and listened. And I heard it. Heavy footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Then loud banging, like someone was climbing the stairs one step at a time and hitting the walls as they came up. It sounded so real that my first thought was, someone broke in. I panicked. I grabbed a kitchen knife, and Leah and I locked ourselves in the bathroom. We stood there barely breathing while something moved in the hallway outside. We could hear it pacing back and forth, right outside the door. I remember my hand shaking so badly that the knife kept tapping against the sink. Then, after what felt like forever, we heard the front door slam. We thought whoever it was had left, so we called our grandmother and asked her to come over. But when she got there and knocked on the front door, Leah and I just looked at each other because we had already heard that door slam shut from inside the bathroom. When we finally came out, both doors to the house were still locked. The front door was locked. The back door was locked. No one else had a key. Whatever had been inside that house with us, it didn't leave through a door. The reason I'm talking about this now is because something happened yesterday, and it feels like everything is getting worse again. I was in my room with my friend Marin, and we both started noticing shadows moving outside my bedroom door. Not just once, over and over. It wasn't my family. It wasn't the dogs. There was nobody walking around out there. At one point, we started speaking to it, mostly because we were scared and didn't know what else to do. And the shadows seemed to react. That's the part I hate admitting the most, because a few months ago, I downloaded one of those spirit communication apps. I did it as a joke, honestly. I didn't really believe it would do anything, but some of the responses I got were too specific, too strange. It felt less like an app and more like something was using it. Since then, the house has felt different. Heavier, angrier, like something that was already there noticed I was finally paying attention. I don't know what's happening in that house. I don't know what it wants, but I know what it feels like. It feels like something is watching me. And lately, it feels like it knows I'm watching back. This happened a long time ago, probably 11 years back. I was around 13, maybe 14. I don't remember my exact age, but I remember the dream. I remember it because it felt too real, the kind of real that stays tucked under your skin. Back then, I used to see this little girl in our house. I called her Hallie. She looked young, maybe 8 or 9. And she always wore this white nightgown with little ruffles along the collar and the hem. I can still picture it clearly. She never looked dirty or frightening at first. She was just there, standing in doorways, watching from corners, quiet as dust in sunlight. For a while, I thought I was the only person who could see her. Then one day, my mom mentioned her, just casually, like she was talking about a neighbor's kid. She said she'd seen the little girl too. That changed everything for me, because suddenly Hallie wasn't just something in my imagination. Someone else had seen her, someone grown, and that matters. One afternoon, I got into a huge argument with my younger brother. I don't even remember what it was about, which tells you how silly it probably was. Something childish, something that felt enormous in the moment and meaningless 10 minutes later. We were yelling at each other, and then I noticed Hallie standing behind him. She was just watching us. I stopped yelling and stared at her. My brother noticed my face and looked over his shoulder, but of course, he didn't see anything. A little while later, we made up, because that's what kids do. We were angry, then we were fine, then we were probably playing again like nothing had happened. That night, I went to bed feeling normal. The rest of the day had been calm. Then, I had the dream. In it, I was walking through our house. Everything looked exactly the way it should have. Same hallway, same doors, same quiet. I went into the bedroom I shared with my brother at the time, and the second I stepped inside, I saw Hallie standing over him. He was on the floor. There was blood everywhere. I remember feeling so horrified in the dream that I actually got sick. Hallie was hurting him, and the worst part was her face. She looked up at me and smiled like she was proud, like she wanted me to approve of what she'd done. I woke up, drenched in sweat and crying. I ran straight to my mom's room and told her everything. She held me, calmed me down, and told me we'd talk more in the morning. I think she was trying not to scare me more than I already was. The next day, after my brother left to go to a friend's house, my mom sat with me and listened. She was gentle about it. She told me sometimes when we're angry or upset, those feelings can slip into our dreams and twist them into something awful. And honestly, that explanation helped a little. I wanted it to be that. I wanted it to be just a bad dream born from a stupid argument. 2 nights later, my brother woke up screaming. He ran to my mom's room, but I stayed in bed. I was half asleep and didn't really understand what was happening, so I drifted off again. The next morning, he went to his friend's house again, and my mom asked me to come sit with her. She looked serious, She asked me if I had told my brother about my nightmare. She asked if I'd ever talked to him about Hallie. I told her, no, I hadn't said a word. I was protective of him, even when we fought. I didn't want to scare him. That's when my mom went pale. I mean, all the color just left her face. She told me my brother had dreamed about Hallie too, only in his dream, it was reversed. She was standing over my body, hurting me, while staring at him like she wanted his approval. After that, I still saw Hallie now and then. She didn't speak much, not really. But one day I finally asked her why she was there. She said something about a necklace. A couple of months later, we were clearing some brush and old debris from part of our land, and we found one. It was small and old-looking, with a rose on the front. My mom got curious and started looking into the history of the property. Eventually, she found an old mention of a little girl who had drowned in the creek behind our house. The article didn't name the girl, but it did mention her parents. And her father had a reputation for being cruel to his family. I don't know whether that little girl was Hallie. I don't know what she wanted from us. But I do know this. After finding that necklace, the house never felt the same again. Lately, I've honestly started wondering if there's something strange going on in my house, and I need someone to tell me if I'm overthinking it or not. A little while ago, I moved with my parents into this old restored house. I don't really know the full history of the place or what happened to it before it was fixed up, but ever since we got here, things have felt different. The first thing I noticed happened while I was in my room watching videos. One of my robes was hanging on a hook, and I suddenly saw it moving on its own. It wasn't a tiny movement either. It was swaying. Nobody was in my room, the window wasn't open, and there was no breeze. The robe is pretty heavy too, so it's not something that would just move easily. Then I started having sleep paralysis more often. Every time it happens, I get this feeling that something is behind me. The weird part is, it doesn't feel evil or threatening. It almost feels gentle, like someone is just there watching over me. I know that sounds strange, but that's the only way I can explain it. Another thing is that I've been acting different in my room. When someone comes in, I get angry way too fast, even over nothing. Sometimes I snap at my brothers or push them away, and afterward I feel awful because it doesn't even feel like me. It's almost like my body reacts before I can think. And whenever I leave my room for too long, coming back feels heavy. I get this sense that something in there is upset with me. I know that probably sounds ridiculous, but it happens enough that I've started noticing the pattern. Usually, by the end of those days, I end up having sleep paralysis again. The scariest time was when I woke up unable to move and saw a girl standing beside my bed. She had no face, and she was wearing something that looked like a hospital gown. She was just watching me. But then she spoke in the softest voice and asked, "Are you okay? You said you were freezing, then burning up, and that you were hurt." That same day was horrible. I felt sick out of nowhere and had to run to the bathroom to throw up. Then I kept going from hot to cold, cold to hot, over and over. After that, I started having these awful cramps, so bad I could barely move. When I told my mom what happened, she didn't believe me. She just said ghosts aren't real. I've also started seeing things in my room. Sometimes I think I see cats that aren't really there. Once, I saw what looked like a head upside down on the ceiling, watching me through the mirror. I've heard breathing behind me when nobody was there, and sometimes I hear a voice whispering, but it's always too quiet for me to understand. There was also this one night during a storm when the power went out. I joked and said, "All right, ghost, if you're here, turn the power back on." And a few seconds later, the lights came back. It could have been a coincidence, but the timing made my stomach drop. The biggest thing, though, is the corner of my room. Every day, I feel like something is watching me from there. Not in a hateful way, not even in a judging way, just watching. I've checked for a camera because I wanted a normal explanation, but there's nothing there. Sometimes I wake up sweating too, with no idea why. I know this is a lot, but I really don't know what to think anymore. Something about my room feels occupied, like I'm not completely alone in there. Back in 2019, I had a dream that changed something in me. Or maybe, in some ways, it broke something open. To give a little context, I grew up feeling mostly ignored. My parents weren't really emotionally mature, and love in my house always felt conditional. I couldn't just ask questions. I couldn't just ask for comfort. Even the smallest bit of attention felt like something I had to earn. So I learned to watch people closely. I learned to adjust myself around everyone, my parents, relatives, family friends, even strangers sometimes. I was always trying to figure out what would keep me safe, what would keep things calm, what version of me would be acceptable. Because of that, I never really learned emotions in a normal way. I didn't know what different feelings were called, or what they felt like in the body, or how to process them. I just knew how to survive them. And then, in 2019, when I think I was starting to sink into depression, I had this dream. In the dream, I appeared out of nowhere. It was like I fell straight out of the air and someone caught me in his arms. His name was something like Elior, though I can't remember it perfectly now. The moment he held me, I felt something I had never felt before. My whole body relaxed. My mind went quiet. I felt safe. I felt wanted. I felt loved. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in this deep, peaceful way, like I didn't have to prove anything to be held. And that mattered because I don't trust people easily. I mean, I don't really trust anyone. I also hated being touched. But in that dream, when he hugged me, I didn't want to move. I didn't want to let go. I didn't want the dream to end. I wanted to stay there forever. But of course, I woke up. After that, I kept trying to go back. I tried to continue the dream. I tried to dream about him again, and eventually, I did. But it felt different. It felt like he didn't really want to be there. Like he had only come because I had pulled him back somehow. When I woke up, I felt awful. Disappointed, yes, but mostly guilty. Not because he didn't want to stay, but because it felt like I had forced him. So I stopped trying to call him back. Or at least, I stopped begging for him. Then a few nights later, he came to me on his own. This time, he was crying. I remember sitting beside him on the floor. I didn't push him to explain. I didn't ask too many questions. I just listened. I let him be vulnerable. I let him fall apart without making him feel ashamed for it. I rubbed his back gently, and we sat close enough that our knees were touching. That was all. Just quiet comfort. Then he hugged me, still crying. But this time, he was crying because he was saying goodbye. He told me he couldn't come back anymore. He told me his name again, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly. But when I woke up, both of those things were gone. His name, his face, all the sharp details slipped away. I only remembered how it felt. And honestly, that feeling has never left me. To this day, I can't fall asleep unless I'm hugging a pillow or a blanket or something close to my chest. A lot of nights, I still cry myself to sleep. I get this ache in my heart, this longing for someone I met in a dream, someone I can barely even describe. And that is how I learned what love felt like. Not because someone in real life showed me, not because I was ready for it, but because this person appeared in my bleak little world and shone so brightly that I couldn't forget him. And in a way, he ruined me. Because I've tried to find that feeling again. I really have. I've tried to connect with people. I've tried to be open. But nothing has ever felt like that. Nothing has ever felt that pure, that safe, that real. And the worst part is that he left. I know it sounds strange to say that about a dream, but it felt like he left without taking responsibility for what he meant to me. Like I didn't matter to him the way he mattered to me. And that hurt even more, because that is exactly what I've felt my whole life, especially with my family. So now, while I'm trying to heal and understand myself, there is still this part of me that can't move on from him. Sometimes I have similar dreams about a faceless man who makes me feel something close to what I felt with Elior. But I always know it isn't him. They're different. They may be kind, they may feel real, but they aren't him. And that messes with me the most, because those dreams don't feel like dreams. They feel like people, like souls. Like someone is actually there, loving me in a way I've been starving for. But I'm still in love with the one who left. I've never really told people the full truth about this, because how do you even say it? How do you tell someone, I dreamed of a man I had never met, and he loved me in a way I didn't know was possible, and now I can't move on because part of me is still waiting for him? People already think I'm strange. Saying that out loud would probably make them think I had finally drifted completely off the map. But it happened, and even if it was only a dream, the love felt real. Real enough to change me. Real enough to haunt me. I live with my partner above a pub in England, and the building is old. Really old. It dates back to the 1700s, and before it became a pub, it was apparently used as stables. So, from the start, it's always felt like the kind of place that carries things with it. Not just history, but a weight. A presence. Over the years, customers and staff have told us about strange things they've seen or heard. People have mentioned an elderly pair sitting quietly at the bar when no one was supposed to be there. Others have heard what sounded like horse hooves, stools scraping across the floor, or footsteps moving around upstairs. About 11 years ago, we had a medium come in because the activity had become hard to ignore. She went upstairs to the function room, which is right beside our flat, and said there were countless spirits passing through that space. She also said there were a few that didn't feel kind. That room has these tall, old beams, about 15 feet up, and there have always been stories about people being hanged there back when the building was still stables. There was also a story about a young girl, maybe 10 or 11, who had died upstairs. I never knew whether to believe that part, but later on, the things we experienced in our flat made me wonder. The medium also went down into the cellar, where we keep the barrels, but she wouldn't stay there. She said there was something very dark in that room, something that made her physically uncomfortable, and she wanted everyone out straight away. Now, I haven't personally seen the older couple at the bar, but my partner has. So have customers. One afternoon, I was outside in the beer garden sorting out some planters. I looked up at the window of the function room and saw a man's face looking down at me. My partner, a staff member, and a couple of friends were there too, and they saw it as well. At first, I thought maybe a customer had wandered upstairs where they shouldn't have been, so I sent my partner and our colleague up there quickly. They ran straight up, but there was nobody there. The only thing out of place was the curtain by that window. It had clearly been moved. We checked the cameras afterward. No one had gone upstairs. No open windows. No breeze. Just the curtain moving. The cellar has always been the worst part of the building. Staff have said they felt something tugging at their hair or clothes while changing barrels. And for around 3 years, our fire alarm and burglar alarm would go off at almost exactly 3 a.m., night after night. Whenever we checked, the sensors were usually triggered either in the function room or, more often, the cellar. A few times my partner went down thinking we were being burgled, only to find the beer lines disconnected. Anyone who has worked with barrels knows those lines don't just come loose on their own. They take effort to remove. We lost so much stock because of it. We had people come out to check the alarms more than once. Every time, they told us the sensors, batteries, and system were all fine. Then there was the activity in our flat. Most nights, also around 3 a.m., we would hear little footsteps running up and down the hallway. Sometimes there would be soft laughter. Sometimes a whisper, gentle but close enough to make your skin go cold. We have 2 dogs and 2 cats, and they reacted every time. The cats would puff up and stare down the hallway. The dogs would growl low, the kind of growl that makes you stop breathing for a second. That was what made us feel like maybe we weren't imagining it. Things quieted down over the past year, and for a while I honestly thought maybe it had passed. The alarm stopped going off. The footsteps stopped. The flat felt lighter. But last night, my partner was cashing up when he heard 2 loud female coughs. The dogs immediately turned their heads toward the sound. Then we heard thumping in the flat again. And now, I'm pregnant. That's what scares me most. I could cope with feeling unsettled before, but now I don't want anything dark or heavy around my unborn baby. I don't want those sleepless nights coming back. I don't want to feel afraid in my own home again. My mom won't stay in the flat for long because she gets terrible headaches here and says she feels like someone is always nearby. A colleague who stayed with us for a while once woke up in the spare room with huge scratches across her back. The animals hadn't been in there. The door had been shut all night. Back when the activity was at its worst, I used to wake up with random bruises all over my body. I felt sick constantly. I went to hospital over and over because doctors were worried it might be something serious. They tested me for all sorts of conditions, even cancer, because the bruising was so bad. But every blood test, every scan, every check came back without an explanation. To this day, nobody has been able to tell me what caused it. I know how this sounds. I really do. But when you live inside it, when the alarms go off at the same time every night, when animals react to things you can't see, when people keep experiencing things in the same rooms, it stops feeling like coincidence. I just want peace now. I want our flat to feel safe again. And with the baby coming, I need to know whether this is something I can cleanse myself, or whether I need someone professional to come in and help. Let me tell you about a spirit people in Thailand still speak of quietly, especially in the countryside, where the banana groves grow thick and wild. Deep along the northern hills and the southern borderlands, there is a kind of wild banana tree called Kluai Tani. Now, to most people, a banana tree is just a plant, useful, ordinary, part of daily life. But villagers have long believed these groves are not ordinary at all. They say that beneath those wide green leaves, hidden among the tall, upright stems, there lives a woman spirit known as Nang Tani. Some call her the Banana Grove Phantom, and the way people describe her is something you do not easily forget. They say her skin has a pale green glow, almost like moonlight passing through a banana leaf. Her lips are soft red, like ripe fruit. She wears a long, traditional Thai dress in shades of green, and when she moves through the grove, she does not walk like we do. On certain nights, especially when the moon is full, her feet do not touch the ground. She drifts. That is the detail that makes people lower their voices. Villagers say that if you pass near a wild banana grove at night, you might hear leaves moving when there is no wind. You might hear whispering, very faint, as though someone is speaking from just behind the trees. And sometimes, people claim to see a strange green shimmer between the trunks, not bright enough to be fire, not steady enough to be a lantern, but enough to make you feel watched. In Thai belief, banana trees can stand at the edge between the human world and the spirit world. They are useful plants, yes, but they are also treated with caution. A wild Kluai tani tree is not something you plant casually beside your house. Older people say doing that is like opening your door to something you may not know how to send away. So in many villages, these trees are planted far from homes, and if someone has to approach one, they do it respectfully. They may bring incense, flowers, sweets, and strips of colorful silk. They speak softly beneath the tree, not because they are trying to command anything, but because they are asking permission. The sweets matter too. People believe the scent can calm restless spirits. It is not just a gift, it is a gesture, a way of saying, I know you are here. I mean no harm, but not everyone listens. There are stories about people who cut into a wild banana tree without care, especially the main stem. The next day, strange things begin. A child in the house might develop a sudden fever. Furniture might shift in the night. Doors might creak open. Sleep becomes uneasy. And according to the elders, peace only returns after offerings are made to Nang Tani. In some remote communities, people still remember older ceremonies involving banana blossoms and protective prayers for harvests. These rituals are done carefully, step by step. The belief is that if you treat the spirit world carelessly, the whole village might feel the disturbance. The most dangerous time is said to be the full moon. That is when Nang Tani's power is strongest. Elders warn young people never to wander into a wild banana grove alone on those nights. Not because she always attacks, but because you may accidentally enter into something deeper than fear. A promise. Some call it a ghostly contract, and it is not the kind of bargain where you ask once, receive once, and walk away. People say that if someone asks Nang Tani for luck, money, romance, or protection, they must continue honoring her with incense, sweets, and silk. The spirit may grant what was requested, but she does not forget. One story tells of a trader named Chawin, who went into a banana grove under the full moon because his business was failing. He brought offerings and asked for fortune. The very next week, customers returned. His money problems eased. People said he was lucky. But Chawin stopped sleeping well. Night after night, he dreamed he was running through endless banana groves. The leaves were huge, the path kept twisting, and behind him floated a woman in green, glowing softly in the dark. He would wake soaked in sweat, heart pounding, sure he had already repaid whatever he owed. But the dreams kept coming. That is the frightening part of stories like this. The villagers say you may think the promise is finished, but the spirit may not agree. Nang Tani is not only feared as a haunting presence, she is also seen as a kind of moral judge. People say she watches men who betray, deceive, or harm women. She does not always punish with violence. Sometimes she punishes with fear. A cruel husband walking home late at night might hear banana leaves rustling outside his house. He might see a green figure swaying in the moonlight. He might try to run, only to feel his legs freeze beneath him. Others speak of pressure on the chest, sleepless nights, racing hearts, and the constant feeling that someone is standing just out of sight. To many villagers, Nang Tani is not evil in a simple way. She is dangerous, yes, but she is also a guardian of boundaries. The boundary between nature and humans, between respect and arrogance, between promise and betrayal. And even today, her legend has not disappeared. In modern Thailand, Nang Tani has stepped out of old village whispers and into films, animations, online videos, and late-night ghost stories. People still share strange accounts, banana leaves moving like human arms, drivers feeling sudden chills on lonely roads, green flashes near empty lots where wild trees grow. Some people explain it all away. They say it is moonlight, tired eyes, wind moving through leaves, or the imagination turning shadows into bodies? Maybe, but folklore has its own way of listening. And for those who grew up near the groves, the warning remains simple. Do not mock what you do not understand. Do not take from nature without respect. Do not make promises lightly. And if, one night, beneath the banana leaves, you see a woman in green drifting where no person should be standing, lower your eyes and keep walking. Because some legends do not stay in the past. Some wait quietly in the trees. I've had strange experiences for as long as I can remember. I mean, my whole life. Some of them have scared me so badly I could hardly breathe. Others were quieter, more like a shadow passing through the corner of my day. But they've always been there. I want to share a couple of stories first, and then I have some questions for people who might understand what this is like. The first one is probably my earliest memory of anything paranormal. I couldn't have been more than a year old, maybe a little older, because I still had a pacifier. When I was little, I stayed with my Aunt Marla a lot. My mom worked long hours, so if I wasn't home with her, I was usually at my aunt's house. Whenever I slept over, my aunt would put my crib in the spare room, right across from her bedroom. I remember waking up one night and sitting up in the crib. I was looking around for my pacifier, and once I found it, I put it back in my mouth. Then I looked toward the door. My aunt always left it cracked open a little. And there, slowly leaning into the doorway, was this dark figure. It wasn't standing fully in the room. It was just peeking in, like it was watching me. I remember being so terrified that I couldn't even cry at first. My whole body just froze. Eventually, I must have made some kind of noise, because suddenly the figure was gone, and my aunt was in the room trying to calm me down. The next morning, she noticed I had bitten almost all the way through my pacifier. A few years ago, I asked her if she remembered that night. I wanted to know if maybe someone else had been in the house, or if there was any normal explanation for what I saw. She said she didn't remember anyone else being there, but she definitely remembered that something had scared me badly. She said, "It was probably just a nightmare." But honestly, I don't think it was. Since then, things like that have happened to me over and over again. Sometimes I'll see someone for just a second, so quickly that I almost convince myself I imagined it. Other times, I'll walk into a certain room or hallway and feel this heavy, awful pressure, like something there knows I noticed it. But the most frightened I've ever been happened pretty recently. It was early evening, just after sunset, and my family and I were at the hospital visiting a family friend who had just had a baby. My mom realized she had left the gift bag in the car, and I offered to go get it. That was my first mistake. Hospitals have always made me uneasy, not just in the normal way either. There have been several times when I felt something there that I couldn't explain. I went out to the parking garage, and the second I stepped inside, that familiar feeling hit me. My breathing got tight. My stomach turned. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this deep, horrible certainty that I was not alone. I hurried to the car, grabbed the gift, and started walking back toward the elevator. The whole time I kept whispering to myself, "It's in your head, it's in your head, it's just in your head." And then, right beside my ear, close enough that it felt like someone was leaning in, I heard a voice whisper, "It's not in your head." I spun around so fast, ready to fight whatever was there. But there was nothing. No person, no footsteps, no movement. Just that sick feeling, suddenly so strong I thought I might actually throw up. I ran back to the elevator. The moment I got around other people again, the feeling eased up. But for weeks afterward, anytime I was alone, I felt it again. That same horrible pressure, that same sense of being watched. And those aren't the only things that have happened. At a school overnight fundraiser, I saw a boy named Nolan standing in the hallway, even though he had died in a car accident the year before. Once, while exploring behind a cabin in the mountains, I smelled my grandmother's perfume, even though she had been gone for years. I've heard voices call my name when nobody was there. And one night, when I was home alone, I saw a tall man in a hat standing near the edge of our backyard. That one nearly broke me. So for anyone who understands experiences like this, I have some questions. Why would these things happen to me? I'm a pretty ordinary person, so I keep wondering if there's something about me that spirits, ghosts, entities, or whatever they are, can sense. When something bad or frightening happens, should I acknowledge that I know it's there, or should I ignore it completely? I've heard people talk about the veil. What does that actually mean? Is there anything I can do, carry, or wear to protect myself when these things happen, whether the presence feels good or bad? And how do I know the difference between something that can hurt me and something that can't? What should I even be watching for? I really don't want to spend the rest of my life being afraid of this. I just want to understand it better. So if anyone has advice, I'd be grateful to hear it. I'm a healthcare worker, and I've always been pretty sensitive to spiritual energy, though I'm not someone who usually walks around with meters or recorders or anything like that. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend and I were at home watching American Horror Story, and out of nowhere we got this impulse to take a weekend trip somewhere haunted. It was completely spontaneous. We ended up booking a room at the old Copper Queen Hotel in Bisbee, Arizona, and honestly, from the start, it felt like something did not want us going there. First, the booking went sideways. We reserved through a travel site, and the next day the hotel called to say they were overbooked and couldn't honor that room. They offered us a different room for more money, and we agreed, but then trying to cancel the original reservation became this exhausting back and forth that almost made us give up on the whole trip. Then, when we finally got on the road and crossed into Bisbee, the car radio suddenly changed stations by itself. It landed on this strange, old-fashioned sounding station, and the first song we heard was about a woman taking her own life by hanging. That was our welcome into town. It felt way too specific. When we got to the hotel, things got even stranger. The front desk told us our reservation had been canceled and that there was no room for us. We explained that we had spoken directly with the manager. Somehow, right before she left for the day, they caught her, and she confirmed everything manually. That's how we finally ended up getting into room 214. That weekend, Bisbee was having this themed festival, so the whole town already had this dreamlike, chaotic energy. People were wandering around in costumes, there were events happening in the streets, and everything felt a little tilted out of normal life. We went out for drinks, stopped at a hotel bar, grabbed food later, talked to a few people, and the night became a little hazy. Nothing too unusual yet, just that weird festival energy hanging over everything. On the walk back, my girlfriend mentioned doing a seance in the room. At the time, I thought it sounded exciting. I wasn't scared. I was curious. But right across from the hotel, everything changed. She suddenly tripped and hit the pavement hard. It happened so fast. I remember trying to move toward her while a police officer nearby was telling me to stop or slow down, and my brain couldn't fully process what I was seeing. When I reached her, she was crying. Her lip was bleeding, her face was bruised, and her front teeth had chipped from the impact. Seeing her like that broke something open in me. I felt guilt, fear, anger, and helplessness all at once. I kept thinking I should have protected her, even though it happened in a split second. We got back to the room. She didn't want medical help right then. She just wanted to leave, but because we had been drinking, we couldn't drive. Eventually, she fell asleep. I couldn't sleep. I was furious. I felt this hot, reckless anger in my chest, and instead of calming down, I went out into the hotel hallway by myself. I started walking the floors, openly yelling at whatever might be there. I was cursing at the spirits, daring them to show themselves, daring them to do something to me instead. The strange part is, the hotel was full that weekend. It was packed. But while I was yelling in the hallways, not one person opened a door. Nobody stepped out. Nobody complained. Nobody even seemed to notice. It felt like my voice was trapped in some kind of bubble. Eventually, I went down to the ground floor. It was dark and quiet, with old furniture sitting around and that heavy stillness old buildings sometimes have at night. That's when I heard it. A faint moaning sound. At first, I tried to explain it away. My mind immediately went to something normal, like maybe it was guests in a nearby room. I wanted it to be that. But then the sound shifted. It didn't stay in one place. It moved. It seemed to change direction and come closer to me. And then this panic hit me so hard it felt physical. It wasn't ordinary fear. It was like my whole body suddenly knew something was right behind me or rushing toward me. Every instinct I had screamed, "Get upstairs, now!" So I ran. I made it back to the second floor and sat in a bright hallway, trying to breathe and make sense of what had just happened. While I was sitting there, a man walked right past me. He didn't look at me, didn't react, didn't seem to register I was there at all. A few minutes later, a woman walked by too and went upstairs, and she also acted like I was invisible. After that, I went back into the room, checked on my girlfriend, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning we woke up and noticed that a small dresser in the room had been moved and opened while we were sleeping. Neither of us had touched it, but the part that really got me came when we were leaving. I looked around the ground floor again, the same place where I had heard that moaning sound the night before, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. There were no guest rooms down there. None. It was just the front desk area, old furniture, the lobby, and the saloon space. So that sound I tried to explain away as guests in another room couldn't have been coming from a room nearby. There wasn't one. I still don't know exactly what happened that night. Maybe my emotional state made me more open to whatever was already there. Maybe the accident changed the energy around us. Maybe all those obstacles before we arrived really were warnings, and we were too stubborn to listen. But I know what I felt in that hallway. And whatever came toward me in the dark, I do not believe it was human. I went to bed around 10 that night, and I remember lying there, just trying to fall asleep, when I heard someone come upstairs. At first, I didn't think too much of it. In a house with other people living there, noises weren't exactly unusual. Eventually, I drifted off. But about an hour later, around 11, my mom came in and woke me up. She looked worried. She said she could hear someone in the bathroom, and it sounded like they were snoring. She thought maybe someone had gone in there and fallen asleep. We didn't know who it was. So we went downstairs, where the other family stayed, and her husband came up to check. He went into the bathroom, stayed in there for a moment, and then came back out and told us, "She's okay." Then he just went back downstairs. But she wasn't okay. My mom and I sat down for a bit, trying to make sense of it, and then the snoring stopped. I looked toward the bottom of the bathroom door, and I saw this shadow there. I don't know how to explain it, but it was horrifying. Something about it just felt wrong. That's when we woke my dad up. He managed to force his way into the bathroom and get her out. Not long after, the ambulance arrived. I still remember seeing her body lying in the hallway. My bedroom was right across from that bathroom, so I could see everything. The paramedics were doing CPR. They were shocking her, trying to bring her back. My dad later told me they shocked her about 6 times before they finally got a heartbeat. Most of the time, I was outside, trying to calm my mom down. Everyone ended up going to the hospital. Her husband, her 2 children, my dad, my brother, my mom, and me. When we got there, she was hooked up to all these machines. There were tubes everywhere, and I remember seeing blood coming through some of them. It didn't feel real. None of it did. The next day, at around 4 in the afternoon, they took her off life support. After that, the house changed. It felt cold, dark, heavy. I didn't want to walk on the patch of carpet where her body had been. I didn't want to use that bathroom anymore. I didn't even want to sleep in my own room because it was right across from where she died. So I moved my bed into the lounge and started using the toilet outside the house instead. Not long after she passed, I was home from school because I was sick. I was lying in the lounge when I heard the front door slam. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. We had this little wooden gate at the top of the stairs, and I heard it open and shut. I assumed one of the other kids had come home too, so I didn't panic. I just carried on with my day. But later, when school ended, I saw all the kids walking down the driveway together. That's when I realized I had been the only one home. And the strange part is, I heard those footsteps and that door slam at around 10 in the morning. When she was alive, that was around the time she usually woke up. Another time, I was in my bedroom, not feeling well and in pain, when my fairy lights started flickering. They weren't even plugged in. My mom told me gently that maybe it was Marla checking on me. Maybe she was just letting me know she was there. After she died, I dreamed about her a lot. In the dreams, I would talk to her. And honestly, I think part of that came from guilt. I was a difficult teenager. We didn't always get along, and when we all lived together, I sometimes felt jealous because my mom spent so much time with her. Even before we moved in together, whenever we went to their house, I felt that jealousy creeping in. So after she was gone, all of those feelings sat with me in a really painful way. Sometimes we would smell her perfume around the house, just out of nowhere. One time, we were shopping, and I kept smelling her perfume in different stores. I told my mom, and she said, "No, she's gone." Then her eyes widened. She told me that the moment she said those words, she suddenly smelled the perfume too. When we moved out of that house about 10 months later, I smelled her perfume again. This time, it was on my blankets while we were packing the car. I still carry guilt about what happened. She died because of a brain aneurysm, and I know that. But I still wonder whether things could have been different if we had called the paramedics sooner, instead of listening when her husband said she was okay. She had been gone for around 40 minutes before they revived her, so I know she probably never stood a chance. And I'm not judging him. I'm not saying he did anything wrong. People panic. People freeze. People grieve differently. But I still don't understand why he told us she was okay, when she clearly wasn't. We first found her when she was still making that snoring sound, and he was in there with her while that was happening. I still wonder what he was doing. I still wonder what he thought he saw. At the hospital, he barely said anything. Again, I'm not accusing him of anything. I just know how it felt. And even now, I still feel the way I feel about it. Hi. I want to tell you about a time in my life that still feels hard to explain, even now. I was a teenage girl living in London, and by then, I already felt like life had been cruel to me for as long as I could remember. I had gone through a rough childhood, a lot of loneliness, a lot of bullying, and things at home were never safe or steady. So when we moved from a cramped flat into a bigger rented house, part of me really thought maybe things would finally calm down. For the first few nights, They did. Then everything started to shift. It was late September 2022, the night before my birthday. I remember it so clearly because I suddenly felt this crushing tightness in my chest. I could barely breathe, and since I'd struggled with asthma before, I panicked. I thought something terrible was happening to me. After that night, my fear just spiraled. I became obsessed with my health. I kept checking my body, watching every little sensation, convincing myself something was badly wrong. It felt like I was losing control, not all at once, but piece by piece. And that was the strange part. It wasn't only anxiety. It felt deeper than that, heavier. I started acting in ways that didn't feel like me. I became angry, restless, defiant. I stopped coping at school. I stayed awake at night with this awful feeling that something was pressing down on my mind, almost like I was being pulled by an invisible force. My family saw the change too. Because of our religious beliefs, they talked about spirits, black magic, things like that. My mother even wondered if someone had brought something dark into our lives. I didn't know what to believe. I just knew I felt terrified of myself. Around that time, my mother was expecting my baby brother, and everything in the house already felt tense. Family members were visiting, arguments were happening, and the atmosphere felt thick, like the air itself was full of stress. At night, I started noticing what looked like a figure in the room, just standing there in the darkness. I tried telling my parents, but they brushed it off. One night was worse than all the others. I woke up feeling like something was sitting on my legs. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My whole body hurt. I remember hitting the wall with my fist, and even that felt unreal, like my body was moving ahead of me. My parents rushed in, but instead of comforting me, it turned into more shouting, more fear, more pain. By then, I barely slept. I was constantly online, constantly hiding in screens, constantly trying to escape my own thoughts. My physical health got worse too. I felt weak, sick, out of rhythm with my own body. Looking back, I think I was overwhelmed in every possible way, mentally, emotionally, physically. But at the time, it felt supernatural. That was the only explanation that seemed big enough. Then in spring 2024, we moved again, this time to a bungalow. And strangely, after that, the intense feeling in that old house disappeared. I still struggled. I still had episodes where I acted recklessly, where I didn't understand myself, where I scared myself. But that trapped, haunted feeling wasn't the same anymore. There were still bad periods after that. I had times when I shouted, stole money from my parents, or felt like I was slipping into someone I didn't recognize. The last time I truly felt that old sense of being overtaken was early in 2025. Since then, it's been more like waves. Not gone, but different. Still, when I came home, things settled. So that's what I've been carrying. A period of my life where fear, trauma, family conflict, poor health, sleeplessness, and something I still can't fully name all collided. Sometimes I wonder whether it was a spirit, a jinn, something outside me. Other times, I wonder whether it was years of pain finally breaking through in the darkest way possible. I still don't have a perfect answer. I only know that, to me, it felt real. The fear was real. The heaviness was real. The sense of losing myself was real. And maybe that's the hardest part of all. Trying to understand whether I was being haunted by something unseen, or by everything I had already lived through. I need you to hear me out, because I know how this sounds. I've lived in this house for nearly a decade, and from the very beginning, it's felt like I was sharing it with someone. Not in a frightening, evil kind of way, nothing like that. Just strange, constant, impossible to ignore things that have become part of life here. Over the years, I've seen full apparitions more than once. Most often, it's been a woman, usually in a long dress, quietly moving through the hallway or passing by a doorway like she belongs here. A few times, I've also seen an older man standing on the stairs, still and watchful, as if he's pausing in the middle of doing something. My partner, Eli, and I have both heard voices too. Not vague noises you can brush off, but whispers right into an ear, like someone is standing inches away. Sometimes it happens in the middle of the afternoon, sometimes late at night. We've heard knocking, banging, our names being called. There's honestly so much more, but after all these years it starts to blur together. Things changed recently when we decided to put the house up for sale. Since then, it's like the activity has ramped up. The voices have become more direct, saying things like, "I'm still here," or "Please stay with me," while I'm just standing in the kitchen or walking through the house in broad daylight. I've been seeing the woman more often too, catching her crossing the landing or peeking around a door before disappearing. And then there's everything else. All at once, things in the house started going wrong in ways that felt almost absurd. A curtain rod in the front room suddenly came crashing down, even though it hadn't been touched in years. Then another one fell in a different room a few days later. We've had plumbing issues, leaks where there shouldn't be leaks, the water heater giving out, little disaster after little disaster. I know houses have problems, I do. But this felt different, like the place itself was resisting the idea of us leaving. Yesterday, I reached a point where I just couldn't ignore it anymore. I stood there and spoke out loud to whoever might be here. I asked what they wanted. I said that if they were attached to us or to the house, they were welcome to come with us in spirit if that gave them peace, but we really did need to move on. A friend of mine, Mara, who's always been sensitive to this kind of thing, was with me, and she said, "If you're listening, show us a sign. Let us know you mean no harm." Then last night, the strangest part happened. I was lying in bed scrolling through Facebook, half distracted, when a post popped up in a local history group. It wasn't even new, it was from years ago, and somehow I had never seen it before. The post showed an old black and white photograph of a couple standing outside my house sometime in the 1960s. And the second I saw them, my stomach dropped, because I knew them. I mean, not personally, obviously, but I knew those faces. They were the same two people I'd been seeing in this house all these years. The woman, the older man. It was them. Maybe that doesn't sound extraordinary to everyone else. Maybe it's just an algorithm, a coincidence, one of those random internet moments. But when you've lived with something for this long, when you ask for reassurance and then suddenly find a photograph of the exact people you've been seeing, it's hard not to feel like you were being answered. I haven't reached out to the person who posted it. I keep thinking about it, but how do you even begin that conversation? "Hi, I think your late grandparents are still in my house." Feels like a terrible message to send a stranger. And honestly, if someone sent that to me, I'd probably never recover from the awkwardness of it. So I've just been sitting with it, trying to make sense of it. And more than anything, feeling oddly comforted by the idea that maybe they were never trying to scare us at all. Maybe they just didn't want to be forgotten. Have you ever walked the quiet hillside paths at the Chinese University of Hong Kong after dark? It feels different up there at night. In the daytime, the campus is calm and open, almost comforting. But once the sun goes down, the trees start whispering in the wind, the shadows stretch across the road, and even a familiar shortcut can feel strangely alive. There's one path students still talk about in particular. Some call it Ribbon Path, a narrow trail that winds from the dorms toward the heart of campus. For years, students have passed down stories about a girl who appears there late at night. She's said to wear an old-fashioned uniform, and she always keeps her head lowered. The most unsettling part is her long braid, hanging down her back and swaying gently as she walks. People used to call her the braided girl, but in some retellings now, they call her the ribbon girl. No one can really point to where the story began. It seems to have grown quietly over time, from whispered dorm conversations, nervous late-night walks, and the sort of moments that feel small until you tell them out loud. An unfamiliar sound, a shadow that seems to move when nothing is there, a figure glimpsed just a second too long. Little by little, those moments turned into a legend that settled into campus life. One version says the girl met a tragic end many years ago. According to the story, she was trying to reach the Ma Lu Shui area by clinging to a train during a time when many desperate people crossed into Hong Kong however they could. As the tale goes, something caught in the train door, perhaps her braid, perhaps part of her clothing, and in an instant, everything went horribly wrong. She died before anyone could help her. Whether that really happened or not, the image stayed with people. A young woman, a lonely stretch of land, a braid left behind as the last thing anyone remembered. The story became even more vivid because people kept adding their own encounters to it. One of the most repeated is about a first-year student who stayed late studying and headed back to his residence well past midnight. As he walked along Ribbon Path, he noticed a girl some distance ahead of him. She moved slowly and silently, and in the weak light, all he could really see was the long braid down her back. Trying to steady himself, he called out to her and asked if she could turn around. She stopped. Then, very slowly, she lifted her head. And where her face should have been, there was only darkness and hair, as though the braid had swallowed every feature. He ran all the way back without looking behind him, and after that, people said he was never quite the same. Another story came from a student photographer who liked wandering campus alone at night, taking pictures for assignments. After one of those walks, he checked his camera and found a few photos he didn't remember taking. They were all time-stamped around the moment he'd passed along Ribbon Path. In one image, there was a blurred shape that looked almost like a twisted braid. In another, there seemed to be someone facing the lens, though the face was completely hidden. He deleted the pictures, thinking it had to be a glitch. The next morning, they were back. Maybe that's why the story has lasted so long. It's not just about a ghost. It's about what happens when people are tired, alone, stressed, and walking through silence that feels a little too deep. It's about how fear fills in the blanks. And it's about how a place can hold a story so long that the story starts shaping the place. Whether the ribbon girl is real or not almost doesn't matter anymore. She lives in the way students warn each other not to walk that path alone too late. She lives in the nervous laughter, the hurried footsteps, the glances over the shoulder. And maybe that's the most human part of all. Sometimes what haunts us is not a spirit in the dark, but the part of our own mind that cannot bear not knowing what's there. I moved around a lot when I was a kid, but the place that stays with me most is the East Riding of Yorkshire. We were there for close to 8 years, and in all that time, I only had one experience that ever made me seriously wonder whether something paranormal had happened. It took place at Fort Paulson, a coastal fort and museum near the Humber, not far from Hull. I went there with my family when I was about 14. I've always loved history, so I was genuinely excited. I thought it would feel grand and atmospheric in that usual museum way, but instead it felt tired, almost forgotten. Parts of the place were shabby, some of the exhibits looked worn out, and the old mannequins in period uniforms were honestly more unsettling than educational. I remember one of the staff mentioning that the museum had seen better days and was struggling to stay fully maintained. At one point, I wandered off ahead of my family because they were lingering over the displays, and I ended up finding the entrance to an underground passage. I went down the steps on my own, and right away, the air felt different. The tunnel was narrow, with curved white walls, and every footstep bounced back at me in these harsh, empty echoes. It felt close and oppressive in a way I still remember clearly. What really got to me, though, was not just how the tunnel looked, it was the feeling. With every step, I became more and more sure that something else was down there with me. I know how dramatic that sounds, but it's the truth. I felt watched. I felt like if I kept going all the way through, something would be waiting at the other end. I hesitated for longer than I'd like to admit. The only reason I finally kept moving was because another visitor, an older man, came down into the tunnel behind me. His presence made it feel possible to carry on, but it didn't take away that horrible sense that we weren't alone. When I reached the far end, there was a small historical display there, something from the Tudor period, but I barely looked at it. I turned around almost immediately and hurried back up to the surface, trying not to panic. Years later, before I wrote any of this down, I looked into the history of the place to see whether anyone else had ever felt anything similar. That was when I found out Fort Paulson had a pretty strong reputation for hauntings. Paranormal teams had apparently investigated it, and there were all sorts of stories attached to the site. People talked about an airman seen near one of the old aircraft exhibits, and there were stories about a woman in Victorian dress appearing near an old railway carriage. The story that unsettled me most, though, was the one about a soldier. According to local accounts, he had once been locked in an underground cell after some kind of offense while stationed there. Staff and visitors had reported hearing heavy boots in the corridors, and some claimed to have seen a dark figure moving through the underground spaces. A few even said they'd caught faint voices telling them to leave. What really stopped me, though, was reading that other people had described that same tunnel the way I remembered it. They talked about feeling crushed by the atmosphere, hearing voices, seeing shadows, even feeling as though unseen hands had reached for them. I can't prove any of that is real, and I'm not going to pretend I know exactly what happened. I only know what I felt that day. Standing in that tunnel, deep under the fort, I was absolutely certain I was not there by myself. I want to tell you about something that stayed with me for years, and even now, I still can't fully explain it. Back in late winter of 2018, not long after my family moved into a small cottage in the Irish Midlands, the whole area was hit by this massive snowstorm. It wasn't just a bit of bad weather either. The snow came down so heavily that all the little country roads in and out of our village were completely blocked. Everything just stopped. School was called off for nearly 2 weeks, and because we were still new to the area, I spent a lot of that time wandering and getting a feel for the place. Our village sat right beside the Bog of Allen, this huge stretch of raised bogland, wild and open and eerie in its own way, especially under snow. One afternoon, I decided to head out there with my dog and explore. We made our way across the snowy ground and eventually found a narrow trail that led toward a patch of planted forest. The place was quiet in that strange way snow makes everything quiet, like the whole world is holding its breath. My dog stayed close as we followed the path deeper between the trees, and that's when I noticed the hoof prints. They were deer tracks, clear as anything in the snow. From the size of them, I guessed they probably belonged to a young deer, maybe not fully grown yet. But what caught me off guard was not just the tracks themselves. It was where they were. They began right in the middle of the trail. Not from the woods to the side, not crossing over from one patch of trees to another. Just there, as if the deer had dropped straight down onto the path from nowhere. I stood there staring at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and then followed them farther along. A short distance later, they stopped. Just stopped. There was nothing beyond them, no broken pattern, No sign that the deer had bounded off. No drag marks, no disturbed snow, no deeper impressions that would suggest a leap into the brush. The prints were neat, even, and almost identical all the way through. Then, suddenly, nothing. I remember standing there with this weird mix of curiosity and unease, telling myself there had to be a simple reason. So I checked the trees beside the trail, thinking maybe the deer had jumped into the woods, and I just wasn't seeing the next set of tracks properly. I even walked into the forest a bit to look around, but I couldn't find a single continuation. I thought maybe drifting snow had covered part of the trail, but there really weren't any obvious drifts where I was. Then I wondered if fresh snowfall had softened or hidden some of the prints. But even that didn't quite fit, because the tracks that were there looked crisp enough. As best as I could tell, they simply started on the path and ended on the path. I still remember how strange that felt. Now it's been years, and I still don't know what I was looking at that day. I'm the kind of person who's open-minded about things I can't explain, but I'm not eager to jump straight to something paranormal either. I honestly think there's probably a logical explanation buried in there somewhere, one I just haven't been able to land on. Still, in my own head, I've always called them the phantom deer tracks. I've heard people talk about odd deer encounters before, and stories where something about them just feels wrong. But this wasn't even seeing a deer. It was just the evidence of one, appearing and disappearing in a way that didn't make any sense. I know that doesn't exactly help my case. Still, I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody. I know what I saw, or at least, what I found. I saw those tracks beginning in the middle of that snowy trail and ending just as abruptly, and to this day, I can't explain it in a way that feels complete. So that's the story. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary answer I missed. Maybe there's not. But whatever it was, I've never forgotten that walk through the snow, or the feeling of standing there in the silence, staring at prints that seemed to come from nowhere at all. You know, most people are familiar with the idea that we sometimes see what we expect to see. We talk about it all the time. A strange sound in the dark becomes a voice. A shadow in the corner turns into a figure. A sheet over a chair suddenly looks like something alive because the mind hates a gap and rushes to fill it. But I don't think people talk enough about the reverse. Sometimes the mind doesn't invent something that is there. Sometimes it erases it. There's this pattern people have noticed in colder places right at the beginning of spring, when motorcycles start coming back onto the roads after months of winter. A driver makes a turn, and even when witnesses, traffic cameras, and common sense all say the motorcycle was clearly visible, the driver will still insist, with total sincerity, "I never saw them." And what's eerie is, they're not always lying. In some cases, they looked right at the rider. They had every chance to notice. And then, even after the collision, they seem stunned, like they truly cannot understand what they just hit. That fascinates me, because it suggests the eyes did their job. The problem wasn't vision, it was expectation. The driver's brain had made that same turn again and again all winter long, never once needing to account for a motorcycle. So when one finally appeared on, say, the second or third day of April, the brain rejected it. It took in the image, decided it made no sense in that familiar setting, and almost deleted it from conscious awareness. I think something similar happens in stranger situations too. Imagine someone glancing up at an apartment building and seeing a person clinging to a window ledge. Not just a glimpse, not some blurry motion, but a direct, clear look. And yet later, when the police ask what they saw, the witness says, "I thought it was a blanket hanging out of the window." People hear that and assume the witness was careless or confused or didn't really look. But maybe they did look, Maybe they stared right at a human being in a place the mind could not accept a human being would be. And so the mind softened it, reshaped it, turned it into something ordinary, something explainable. A blanket, a curtain, anything but a person in danger. That's the part I keep coming back to. We always talk about imagination as the thing that adds. But what if imagination also subtracts? What if it smooths over the impossible so we can keep moving through the world without stopping dead every 5 minutes in shock? That's why I think this could happen with ghosts too. Not just people imagining ghosts where there are none, but people genuinely encountering something strange and having the mind immediately rework it into something harmless. A disembodied voice becomes wind through a crack. A figure at the end of the hallway becomes a trick of the light. A presence becomes just the house settling. And then later, we say the imagination caused the haunting, when maybe the imagination was actually the cover story. And if we can do that with joyful things, ordinary things, even familiar things, then why wouldn't we do it with something deeply unsettling? So when I hear stories about apparitions, voices, or impossible moments, I don't automatically assume people are making things up because they wanted to believe. Sometimes I wonder if the opposite happened. Sometimes I wonder whether they really did see something extraordinary, and their mind worked desperately, lovingly, almost protectively, to turn it into something else. Not because they were foolish, because they were human. I want to tell you about a few moments from my life that still stay with me, even now. They're the kind of memories that come back late at night, the kind you try to explain away with logic, and somehow never fully can. The first happened a few years ago, when my family and I stayed in this old gatehouse in England called Tixall Gatehouse. It was me, my parents, and my 2 brothers, and even though the place had several levels, we all decided to sleep on the same floor because it just felt more comfortable that way. The floor above us was this huge empty hall with barely anything in it except an old table game set in the middle, which somehow made it feel even stranger. Earlier that evening, I'd been reading through the guest book, and page after page had little notes from people saying they'd heard footsteps, voices, or felt like they weren't alone. I remember laughing it off at first, because old buildings creak, don't they? They settle, they groan, they make noise. But then sometime around 3 in the morning, while everyone else was asleep, I was still awake. I've never been a great sleeper, and out of nowhere, I heard it. Heavy footsteps. Not a creak, not a little shuffle. Proper, deliberate footsteps crossing the hall above us. Loud enough that I could make out each one clearly. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, maybe a little more, but it felt much longer when I was lying there frozen, listening. What really unsettled me was that a couple had written in the guest book that they'd heard the exact same thing from the same bedroom. I'm not easily frightened, but that night I turned the radio on just to have some company, and I didn't sleep again until morning. The second one happened on New Year's Eve, or technically New Year's morning, years ago. We were driving a friend of mine home after a party that had been disappointingly dull, so none of us were exactly wild or out of control. My mate Callum was driving, stone cold sober, and I'd barely had anything myself. We were on a stretch of the A5, heading through this well-lit road, just chatting nonsense like friends do when it's late, and you're all tired but still buzzing a little. I was sitting in the middle of the back seat, half listening to the conversation in the front, half watching the road ahead. Then suddenly, this man was just there. Not walking into the road, not stumbling out from the side, just there, right in front of the car. Callum swerved hard, and all of us jolted with it. But the part that still makes my skin crawl is that the man didn't react at all. He didn't turn his head, didn't flinch, didn't even seem aware that a car had nearly hit him. It was like he was in his own world. We all twisted around to look back, and there was no one there. Nothing. No figure, no movement, no sign anyone had even been on the road. We still talk about that night now, all these years later, because none of us has ever come up with an explanation that feels right. The third story goes back to when I was 16, just after finishing my exams. A friend of mine lived in a village where everyone talked about this one abandoned house out in the fields. Locals swore it was haunted. I'd heard bits and pieces, then looked into it, and found out it had once been kennels, and a woman had died there alone. It was so isolated that nobody found her for quite some time. You can imagine what that sort of story does to a group of bored teenagers. That night, though, everything changed. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke up needing the toilet. The others were asleep, and I remember stepping out of the tent and glancing toward the house. In one of the upstairs windows, there was a light. A soft, flickering light, like a candle. And behind it, I could see the shape of someone moving slowly across the room. I honestly thought there must be a person in there, so I shook my friends awake and told them to look. They were annoyed at first, half asleep and grumbling, but then they saw it too. All 4 of us stood there watching this candlelight drift from one side of the room to the other, as if someone was walking around inside. After what we'd seen earlier that day, we knew that house had been empty. I was terrified, properly terrified. In the end, I rang my dad in the middle of the night and told him I was leaving the tent and waiting somewhere else until daylight. I didn't care how ridiculous I sounded. I just needed to be away from that field. The last one is the story my family still talks about the most, because it felt personal. My granddad had passed away a couple of years earlier, and one weekend my parents were meant to be going away for their anniversary. They were heading to Paris, and my older brother and I were staying with my grandmother. I was about 6 at the time, and my brother Ryan was a few years older than me. In the middle of that first night, I woke up suddenly because I felt a firm push on my shoulder, strong enough to jolt me awake. I remember sitting straight up, thinking it must have been Ryan messing with me, but he wasn't there. The room was quiet. Nothing moved. I just lay there in the dark, wide awake, trying to make sense of it. A little while later, maybe 10 minutes, maybe more, I saw my grandmother hurry past the bedroom door and rush downstairs. I stayed awake for ages after that, too scared and confused to settle. Then, before morning, my dad arrived back unexpectedly. My parents hadn't even made it properly into Paris before they got the call. My grandmother had suffered a heart attack. The strangest part came the next morning, when my brother told Mum and Dad that he'd also been woken in the night. He said someone had pushed his shoulder and whispered in his ear, but when he looked around, there was no one there. Neither of us had said anything to each other before that. We were just children, and we both described almost the same thing. People always say they think it was my granddad, somehow warning us, somehow waking us up. I don't know what I believe, not completely, but I do know that every person in my family remembers that night clearly, and none of us has ever forgotten how it felt. I can still explain away bits and pieces of these stories if I try hard enough. Old houses make noise, roads play tricks on your eyes, teenagers scare themselves, children dream strange things. But even with all that said, there's still a part of me that remembers exactly how real each moment felt. And that's the part I can never quite reason away. So here's something I still can't fully explain. A while back, in late summer of 2019, my partner Evan and I went out for a walk around our neighborhood after having a few friends over for board games. It was one of those soft, warm nights that makes everything feel a little enchanted. After everyone left, we stepped outside just to enjoy it. The streets were quiet, the air felt perfect, and the flowers in the dark looked almost unreal, like the whole neighborhood had turned into a dream. We wandered for a while, just talking and taking our time. It must have been close to midnight when we stopped at the corner near this big old white church in our neighborhood in southeast Portland. What stood out was how bright that block was. The church had this newer building beside it, and both places were lit up so well that the whole corner almost glowed. We stood there for several minutes, just chatting and deciding which way to go next. Then, as we finally turned to leave, I noticed someone across the street. At first, I assumed it was just a person standing near a tree by the sidewalk. They seemed to be wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt and lighter pants, kind of slouched forward, swaying a little. My brain did what brains do, I guess. I tried to explain it away immediately. Maybe someone drunk. Maybe someone trying not to be noticed. Maybe I'd just somehow missed them before. But the longer I looked, the less any of those explanations made sense. I had been standing there for several minutes already. That whole block was brightly lit. If someone had been there the whole time, I should have seen them. And yet I hadn't. Not until that exact moment. I kept looking for several seconds, long enough to be certain I wasn't imagining it. Then I looked away, because staring at a stranger for that long felt wrong. But this awful fear had already started building inside me, fast and physical, like my whole body knew something before my mind could catch up. A second later, I looked back, and the figure was gone. Not gone in a normal way, like someone stepping behind something or walking off. It was more like what I had seen had dissolved back into the tree and the darkness around it. The pale part seemed to blend into the trunk, and the darker part just stretched into shadow. Even now, trying to describe it makes me feel strange. What I remember most clearly is the fear. It was overwhelming. Not ordinary fear, not nerves, not the feeling of being startled. It was this deep, crushing sense that something was terribly wrong. I felt it in every part of me. As Evan and I kept walking, all I could think was, how do I tell him we need to go home right now? I could barely speak. I was trying to figure out how to say it without sounding ridiculous, and before I could say anything, he looked at me and said, "Did you see it too?" That was the moment everything changed for me, because until then, I was still trying to convince myself there had to be some normal explanation. But he had seen it. He had felt it too. I just told him I wanted to go home. He didn't argue. He stayed calm, told me not to run, and kept us moving at a steady pace. I was too afraid to look behind us. We ended up walking near some other people out with their dog, just because being close to other humans made me feel a little safer. We hardly spoke until we got home. Once we were inside, we finally talked about it. The details matched. We had seen the same shape, in the same place, and felt the same wave of dread. He described parts of it before I even could. There wasn't that uncertainty you usually get when two people compare a weird experience. It lined up too neatly. And the strange thing is, I've been back there many times since then. Daytime, nighttime, alone, with other people. Nothing. No feeling, no figure, no sign of anything at all. So I can't neatly explain what happened. I only know what I saw, what he saw, and how real it felt in that moment. Some experiences don't leave you because they scare you. They stay because, somewhere deep down, you know you brushed against something you still don't understand. A few weeks ago, I went on a tour of the old Charleston jail in Charleston, South Carolina, and something happened that I still cannot fully explain. I'm a nanny. I'm 24, and I had traveled there with the family I work for. During the day I was with them, but my evenings were free, and even though I'm not usually the kind of person who explores a city alone, I wanted to push myself a little and do something different. So I signed up for the tour. Not even 20 minutes in, the guide started telling us the story of a woman named Lavina, this infamous figure people say used to lure men in, rob them, and have them killed. According to the legend, she was later executed at the jail while wearing her wedding dress, and ever since then, people have claimed her spirit still lingers there. The guide said she's especially known for scratching visitors. While he was talking, I suddenly felt this intense heat rising in my head and neck. Not just warm, but burning. My skin started tingling, and I got so lightheaded that I had to ask where the restroom was. The guide looked at me strangely and asked if I'd had a red mark on my neck before the tour started. I went into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and just froze. There was a raised scratch along my neck, thin and sharp, like the mark from a fingernail. I know for a fact it had not been there before. I had checked myself in the mirror not long before the tour began, and I would have noticed something that obvious. The guide even took a photo and said it was one of the clearest marks he'd seen. As the tour continued, it only got worse. Hotter, redder, more painful. It honestly felt like something was still bothering me the entire time I was there. By the next morning, it had nearly disappeared, faded down to a soft pink line near my collarbone. But the scratch is only part of what's been bothering me. About a year ago, I went through a serious medical emergency. It was the closest I have ever come to dying, and it shook me in a way I still don't think I've fully recovered from. Before that happened, I could visit haunted places, hear ghost stories, go on tours like this, and maybe I'd get a few chills or that uneasy feeling people talk about. Nothing more than that. This time was completely different. From the moment I stepped into that jail, I felt overwhelmed by this heavy energy. And after the scratch appeared, it became emotional in a way I wasn't prepared for. It was like being forced back into the memory of that medical crisis again and again, even though the stories on the tour had nothing to do with me personally. I could not stop crying. I mean really crying. I'm sure I looked unwell, or unstable, or both. But it felt as though something in me had opened, like I had let down some invisible barrier, and suddenly everything on the other side could reach me. The guide told me that sometimes spirits are drawn to people who seem vulnerable, and he suggested that being a young woman out alone might have made me stand out. But honestly, I can't shake the feeling that what happened to me last year may have changed something. I don't know whether that means emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, or something else entirely, but I have not felt the same since. I've tried to explain all of this away. I really have. I thought maybe the mark came from my bag strap, but it was hanging on the other side of my body. I wondered if it could have been some kind of rash or skin reaction, but I've never had anything like that happen so suddenly, and definitely not with timing that strange. I'm still naturally skeptical, and part of me keeps trying to find a logical answer. But then something else happened last week, and that's what pushed me from unsettled into genuinely scared. Since then, I've been trying to make sense of everything. With the anniversary of that near-death experience getting closer, I've started wondering if this is all connected to stress or trauma, if maybe my mind is dredging things up in ways I don't understand. But some of these moments feel so vivid, so physical, that I can't easily dismiss them. There have even been times in my apartment when I thought I sensed something nearby, or caught shadowy movement out of the corner of my eye, and I always told myself it was just my imagination. Now, I'm not so sure what to think. I still don't know whether what I experienced was paranormal, psychological, or some complicated mix of both. I just know it felt real, and if I'm being honest, it scared me more than I want to admit. When I was about 8, my mom and stepdad moved us to a rural part of Missouri because they thought life would be better there and the work would be steadier. The house they bought sat near a very old cemetery, maybe a little over half a mile away across a stretch of open land, and there was this weathered little church nearby that had been abandoned for years. Me and the neighborhood kids used to wander through it all the time, just treating it like some mysterious old place to play. Back then, it didn't scare me at all. That changed around my 10th birthday. My mom had me invite a bunch of girls from school for a sleepover, and after cake, presents, and all the usual birthday stuff, we were sent outside to play before it got too late. I wanted to show everybody the old church, so that's where we went. One girl in the group, kind of quiet and off on her own most of the time, drifted away from us and started walking through the cemetery. My mom had always told me never to mess around in there, so when I saw her stepping over graves and acting disrespectful, I got upset. We argued, and I ended up running back to tell my mom. Not long after that, since evening was settling in anyway, she made all of us come back inside. Later that night, all of us were in my room getting ready to sleep, still whispering and giggling the way kids do, when suddenly the bedroom door slammed shut on its own. Every one of us jumped. We screamed, and my mom came rushing in, irritated and half convinced somebody was fooling around. She told us it was probably just the air kicking on, told us to settle down, and walked away. A few minutes later, before we'd even turned the lights out, the door slammed again. This time it didn't stop there. It started shaking against the frame, rattling like somebody was gripping the knob from the other side and jerking it hard. My mom stormed back in, more annoyed than concerned, and accused us of making a scene. We kept telling her it wasn't us, but she didn't buy it. She turned the light off, left the door cracked open, and told us to go to sleep. I was terrified of the dark back then. Really terrified. But because the other girls didn't want a nightlight on, my mom wouldn't let me have mine. So when that door slammed shut a third time and the room dropped completely into darkness, I lost it. I started crying hard, just panicking. Instead of comforting me, my mom got angry. She yanked me out of bed, warned the other girls to be quiet, and made me sleep on the couch in the living room by myself. I remember lying there, crying into my pillow, trying to be silent. After a while, I felt something tug at my blanket. Just a little at first. I froze. Then I slowly lifted my head and saw something I still can't fully explain. It looked like this black, thick, smoky shape, almost hairy around the edges, sliding down the couch. And it seemed attached to a larger mass of the same dark fog that was resting on top of the TV cabinet across the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe right. I just watched it. When that thing started coming back toward me across the room, that was when I finally screamed. A real scream. My stepdad came in this time, flipped on the lights, and the whole thing vanished. Just gone. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. He saw how hysterical I was and told me to come sleep in their room. Once I was there, I finally calmed down enough to fall asleep. But it didn't end that night. That was when the dreams started. For the next several weeks, I kept having the same nightmare over and over. Every time, I woke up sweating, terrified, and ran straight to my parents' room. Then one night, the dream changed. It ended in a way that was so violent and disturbing that even now I don't like thinking about it too long. After that, the dream stopped completely. But so did most of my dreaming. It was almost like some part of my mind just shut down to protect itself. And honestly, ever since then, it has felt like whatever attached itself to me that night never really left. Over the years, strange things have kept happening no matter where I live. Keys disappear and turn up in places they absolutely should not be. Not just mine, other people's too. Houses make odd sounds that nobody can explain. People I've lived with have seen things happen. Objects get knocked over, sometimes thrown. The longer I stay in one place, the stronger it feels, like it settles in and gets comfortable. Moving seems to weaken it for a little while, but never for long. It hasn't truly harmed me, not directly anyway, but it always makes itself known. That's the worst part. It lingers, it watches, it makes the whole house feel uneasy. What's stranger is that when I get really upset or angry, the activity seems to spike. Things fall off shelves. Sometimes they even seem to move toward me. Light bulbs burn out. Lamps flicker. I've touched switches while emotional and watched lights fail right then. My hair is constantly full of static, like there's always some kind of charge clinging to me. And lately, I've started noticing shadowy figures and little floating lights around the house and out on the property more often than I want to admit. So when I tell you this, I'm not telling it like a ghost story just for drama. I'm telling you because I've lived with it for years, and I still don't know what it is. Maybe it's an attachment. Maybe it's something I unknowingly opened myself up to as a child. Maybe it's connected to fear, trauma, or some kind of energy I don't understand. I've tried prayers, cleansings, blessings, all the things people usually recommend, and none of it has made much difference. What I do know is that something changed around that birthday, and nothing has felt completely normal since. I've spent years trying to make sense of it without sounding insane, and that's harder than people think. But when you've seen something with your own eyes, when you've felt it in every house you've lived in after that, you stop worrying so much about whether people believe you. You just want to understand what's been following you all this time. You know, this happened in the early 1990s, and on the surface, it was not some huge cinematic ghost story. It was quiet, almost ordinary, but I still believe something in that old building was paying attention to me. At the time, I had just come out of a relationship that really wore me down. My ex had a way of making me doubt myself constantly, and by the end of it, I felt fragile and exhausted. I did not want noise or drama or people telling me what I should do next. I just needed a place where I could breathe, be alone, and slowly feel like myself again. So I found this lovely little apartment in a small mill town in New Hampshire. It was on the second floor of a brick building that had been there forever, probably more than a century. A cafe sat downstairs, and right across the road was the police station. The best part, though, was the river. Just outside my windows there was a short dam, and the water spilled over it day and night. Not loud in a harsh way, just steady and soothing. The ceilings were tall, the windows were huge, and the whole place felt full of light. Even though it was only a one-bedroom, it felt open and airy, like it had room for me to start over. The day I moved in, I was by myself. I did not have much, just a carload of boxes and small furniture, and I kept going up and down this narrow stairwell from the street to the apartment. At some point, I left my keys on the kitchen table and headed back downstairs for another box. When I came back up, balancing it in my arms, I turned the knob and the door would not open. The strange part was this: the knob itself did not lock. The only way that door could be locked was if the deadbolt had been turned from inside, or locked with a key from outside. It could not just click shut on its own. There was also a wide peephole in the door, with a little cover on the inside. I managed to slide it open with my fingers, and tried reaching in, hoping I could flip the deadbolt back. My arm was nowhere near long enough. And this was before cell phones, because apparently human beings once enjoyed raw inconvenience as a lifestyle. I did not have my landlord's number with me. The cafe was closed. The apartment next door was empty. So the only thing I could think to do was walk across the street and ask the police for help. There were 2 officers inside, and they looked about as busy as you would expect in a tiny town on a quiet day. I explained what had happened and asked if they knew how to contact my landlord. They did not. Then I asked, half embarrassed, whether they could help me get into my own apartment. One of them looked at the other and said, "No, but I know somebody who can." That was not the most reassuring sentence I had ever heard. One of the officers drove me a short way up a hill to a small house. He knocked, and a young man answered. He was in his 20s maybe, and he was a little person, not even 4 feet tall. The officer clearly knew him. After a bit of chatting, he explained my situation and asked whether he could help. The young man said yes, like this was not remotely unusual. So the three of us drove back. We climbed the stairs to my apartment, and the young man opened a closet in the hallway and looked inside. Then he said, There used to be a crate in here." The officer asked, "Need a boost?" He nodded. I invited them both inside to thank them. We talked for a few minutes, and that is when I learned the young man, whose name was Marin, had once lived in that very apartment. Then one of them, I think the officer, said very matter-of-factly, "This building's haunted." No smile, no joke, just stated like the weather. He added that the building across the street had stories too. I had already heard rumors about an old tavern nearby, about kitchen staff seeing a man in an old-fashioned hat, about dishes moving for no reason. So hearing that did not even scare me as much as you might think. It was more like, all right then, good to know. I never even asked what they had seen. I still do not know why. Life settled after that. A woman moved into the apartment next door later that year, and we became friendly. One day she told me, completely out of nowhere, "My apartment is haunted. I know it is." I had never told her a word about what happened on my move-in day. Not one word. She could not explain it exactly. She just felt it. Her cat kept staring into empty corners and reacting to things she could not see. Mine did that too. Then again, cats are little weirdos on the best of days, so who knows? Still, those years in that apartment were some of the happiest, healthiest years of my life. I got stronger. I rested. I picked up hobbies again. I made new friends. I even started dating a kind, steady man who treated me like I was not some puzzle to be broken apart and rearranged. And through all of it, that waterfall was there in the background, every day, every night. Much later, I remembered something a psychic had told me years before. She had said I needed to live somewhere I could hear moving water. I had forgotten all about it until then. But the moment it came back to me, I just knew that apartment had been part of my healing. And the funny thing is, nothing else ever really happened. No flying objects, no shadowy figures, no cold hands on my shoulder in the dark. Nothing. Not until the day I moved out. That day looked almost exactly like the day I moved in, only backward. I was carrying boxes down to my car, going in and out, doing the last of it. Then I came back up the stairs, reached for the knob, turned it, and the deadbolt had locked itself again. This time, though, I had my key in my pocket, so I just stood there for a second and laughed. Then I unlocked the door and said, out loud, "Nice try. You almost had me again." And that was it. It was never a violent feeling in that apartment. Never dark. Never threatening. Honestly, it felt more like something in that place wanted me to notice it. Like it was aware of who came and went, and for whatever reason, it had taken a particular interest in me. Maybe it was just mischief. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was coincidence wrapped in a place that carried a lot of old energy. But I still think about it. I still wonder what a new tenant would say if I knocked on the door and asked whether anything odd had ever happened there. Maybe one day I will. A couple couple of years ago, my roommate and I moved into the apartment we're living in now, and honestly, it all happened because life kind of fell apart at the same time for both of us. He had just gone through a separation from his wife, and since I'd been living with them, that meant I suddenly had nowhere to go to. He didn't really have another place lined up either, so we decided to get an apartment together. His name is Marcus, and he's like family to me, more like a brother than just a roommate, so living together felt like the most natural thing to do. At first, everything was completely normal. For maybe the first 5 or 6 months, there really weren't any problems. We got along well, the apartment felt fine, and it seemed like we'd landed on our feet. But after that, things slowly started to feel off. Not all at once, just little things here and there that kept getting stranger over time. Marcus has been dealing with a lot emotionally. He struggles with depression, anxiety, complex trauma, and a few other mental health issues. And after the separation, all of that got a lot heavier for him. Around that time, a friend of mine who's always been very spiritually sensitive told us she felt like he had something attached to him. She said it had been there for years, possibly since childhood, tied to trauma he went through when he was young. She also said he seemed unusually vulnerable to attracting things, spirits, energies, whatever you want to call them. What made that harder to ignore was that both of us had already seen these shadowy figures around the apartment before she ever said anything. At first we brushed it off, because what else are you supposed to do with something like that? But eventually things seemed to get more intense. Marcus started having terrifying nightmares. His mood would shift in ways that didn't feel like him, and he said he was having intrusive, violent thoughts, and even thoughts about hurting himself. There were also scratches showing up on him. At that point, he asked my friend for help, and she did something that she said got rid of it, though she never explained exactly what she did. For a while after that, things calmed down. It felt like maybe we were past it. But lately, it seems like everything is building again. We've started noticing the shadow figures another time. Our dog has this habit now of staring into empty corners of the apartment like he's watching something we can't see. Kitchen cabinets have been found hanging open for no clear reason, and one morning I came out and several of them were open again, even though nothing had been knocked over or disturbed. I've also noticed strange smells drifting through the apartment at random times, like cigarette smoke, flowers, or strong perfume, even though neither of us uses anything like that. One thing that really unsettles me is my bedroom door. I always shut it firmly before I go to sleep, and more than once I've woken up in the middle of the night or in the morning and found it standing open. I know I closed it. That part really gets to me because it feels so direct. And to be honest, this past year has already been hard enough without all of this. Early last year, I lost my father, and a few months later I changed jobs because the stress at my old one was just too much. The new job is better, and I'm doing a little better than I was, but I'm still carrying a lot. I'm still grieving, still handling family responsibilities, still trying to find my footing after losing him. I know this all sounds rambling and maybe a little unbelievable, but I'm telling it as honestly as I can. I've reached the point where I don't know what to think anymore. Part of me wonders whether Marcus's mental state is somehow affecting the whole atmosphere in the apartment, or whether stress and grief are messing with my head too. Another part of me feels certain that something is there, something we still don't understand. At one point, I even said out loud that whatever it is could stay, as long as it didn't hurt anyone and kept the peace. But if this thing is real, it doesn't seem especially interested in me. It seems drawn to Marcus, like it wants him to know it's there. I guess what I'm really trying to say is this. I don't know whether I'm witnessing something paranormal, something psychological, or some tangled mix of both. I just know that living in that apartment no longer feels the way it used to, and I'm tired of feeling like I'm losing my grip on what's real. want to tell you about someone I met when I was very young, someone I've never really been able to forget. Her name was Marisa. Even now, the clearest memory I have is of sitting across from her in a hallway, both of us facing each other so quietly, like the rest of the world had disappeared. I remember reaching toward her hand, or at least wanting to. That moment has stayed with me all these years. Back then, I was only 4. My mother was told by one of the daycare workers that I was always talking to someone who wasn't there. She actually told my mom she thought I was talking to a ghost. My mother was terrified, especially because I kept coming home withdrawn and upset, and no one could explain why. Marissa's face is something I still see in flashes. One side of it looked badly burned, raw in a way that no child should ever have to witness. But what I remember even more than that was the sadness in her uninjured eye. It was the kind of sadness that made me want to cry just looking at her. If you're wondering what she looked like beyond that, the closest thing I can compare it to is this soft, glowing figure, almost bluish-white, not fully solid but not invisible either. She was there. I could see her. There was this faint shimmer around her, like light moving at the edges. The nearest thing I can compare it to now is the glow of the northern sky. The strangest part is that we didn't really speak the same language, at least not in any normal sense. I only understood one spoken word from her. No. But somehow I understood everything she meant. It wasn't like ordinary conversation. It was more like feeling her thoughts, or having them placed gently into my mind. Sometimes we would sit together without speaking at all, and somehow I still knew exactly what she was trying to tell me. I remember that when she first came to me, I was carrying something painful inside myself. I'm not going to describe that part in detail, because even now it feels too heavy. But I remember crying, feeling deeply unsettled, like I was holding something no child should have had to carry. And somehow, she comforted me. She calmed me down. She distracted me from whatever hurt had wrapped itself around me. Looking back, I sometimes think she may have helped me survive that period by giving my mind somewhere else to go. Then, little by little, she showed me what had happened to her. I need to explain this carefully because even now I don't fully understand it. It wasn't like watching a movie. It wasn't even like remembering something. It was more like stepping inside her experience. I felt what she felt. I sensed her fear, her pain, even the smell of smoke and heat. I saw a house, though the details are blurred now. I knew she had just woken up. I knew the fire had already started. And for some reason, I had the strong sense that a man had caused it. I can't explain how I knew that. I just did. The fire spread quickly. She was trapped. I remember the panic, the confusion, her trying to figure out how to get out. I remember the horror of realizing there was nowhere to go. Her hair caught first. After that, everything became sharper and fuzzier at the same time, the way terrible things do in memory. I remember her falling. I remember her screaming. I remember the unbearable feeling of heat, though not like touching a flame yourself. It was something stranger, like carrying the echo of her pain inside my own body. And then it was over. After that, Marissa and I were together a few more times. Sometimes we spoke in that strange, wordless way. Sometimes we just sat together and shared quiet. Once, I think we simply looked at each other for a long time, like neither of us wanted the moment to end. In my mind, she became my first real friend. That may sound strange, but it's the truth. She comforted me when I was frightened, and somehow she trusted me with her story too. Eventually, I left that daycare after my mother realized something was very wrong. Later in life, I had other experiences I can't fully explain, but I chose not to keep opening that door. It brought too much into my life, and in time I stepped away from it. Still, I've never forgotten Marissa. People can say what they want about imagination, about being 4 years old, about memory being slippery. Maybe some of that is fair, but I know what I experienced felt real. I know her face has never left me. I know the sorrow in her eyes was real to me, and I know that, in one of the most confusing and painful seasons of my childhood, she brought me comfort. That's why I'm telling you this now. Not to convince you of anything, really. Just to tell it honestly. Because some memories don't fade, no matter how much time passes. Some people, even the ones who come and go in ways we can't explain, stay with you. And Marissa stayed with me. When I was about 2 years old, my mom got remarried, and we moved into this old house at the edge of a quiet little wooded town. Even now, just thinking about that place makes my skin crawl. A few summers ago, I brought my fiancé there just to show him where I grew up, and the second we drove away, he looked at me and said the whole house in that part of town felt deeply wrong. I didn't even have to explain it. He felt it too. I was a very quiet kid back then. I liked being alone, making up my own little world in my room. That was around the time I started talking about an invisible friend. My mom used to say it was just a childhood thing, but to me, he felt real. I called him Jasper, and I used to say he was a little boy who lived in the walls, and sometimes in my closet. My mom would hear me talking to him all the time. Then when I was 5, something happened that I still haven't forgotten. I was downstairs with my mom in the basement. It was only partly finished, with this small sitting area, a workbench room, a couple storage spaces, and my parents' bedroom down there too. At one point, my mom asked me to run into the bedroom to grab something. The light was off. I remember standing in the doorway, reaching for the switch, and then I saw it. There was something standing on the far side of the bed. It was huge, maybe 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It looked draped in fabric, or maybe like it was wearing some kind of hood. It wasn't solid exactly, more like pale smoke shaped into a person. White, almost transparent. But what I remember most clearly was the feeling. It felt heavy, ominous, like something I absolutely should not be near. I panicked, completely. I ran back to my mom screaming that there was something bad in the bedroom. She held me while I cried and tried to calm me down, told me maybe it was the dog. But our dog was this tiny terrier, so even then I knew that explanation didn't make any sense. After that, I refused to go into the basement ever again. That was when the night terrors started. I became absolutely terrified at night. I mean, truly terrified. I would curl up as tightly as I could under the blankets and stay frozen there, even when I was uncomfortable, even when I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. I was too scared to move, too scared to even peek out. And when I did finally fall asleep, I'd wake up screaming. I still remember one night after months of this, my mom sitting on the edge of my bed in tears because she was so exhausted and overwhelmed. I wouldn't let her turn off the light. I wouldn't let her leave the room. I just could not sleep. When I was around 7, my mom left her husband, and we moved out of that house. But for a few years after that, I still had to go back there a couple times a month for visits. Every single time, sleep was awful, and I still wouldn't go anywhere near the basement. I'm 25 now, and honestly, some of that fear never really left me. I'm still afraid of the dark. I still have night terrors sometimes. And whenever I think back to that moment in the basement, it still sends a chill right through me. All I know is that the memory still feels real. I haven't been back there in years, But even being near those woods or that side of town still makes me uneasy in a way I can't really explain. It's like stepping into the atmosphere of a nightmare you thought you'd outgrown, only to realize your body remembers every second of it. I've been drawn to ghost stories for as long as I can remember. Even as a kid, anything mysterious or unexplained had my full attention. I was around 11, maybe 12, and my parents took my sister and me to stay at the Hotel del Coronado. That was nearly 20 years ago now, but I still remember the feeling the place gave me the moment we arrived. It was beautiful, of course, but there was something else in the air too. Something heavy. Not exactly bad, just unsettling in a way that made my skin prickle. At the same time, I was thrilled. The old-fashioned elevators were still running then, with an attendant operating them, and downstairs there were little shops and long hallways that felt charming and eerie all at once. I especially remember one lower-level corridor that gave me the strangest feeling, like I wasn't supposed to linger there too long. I kept asking my parents if the hotel had any ghost stories attached to it, or if anyone had ever seen anything unusual there. They didn't really know, so we went to the front desk and asked. The staff handed me a brochure about a woman said to haunt the hotel grounds. Her name, according to the story, was Katie Morgan. She had come to the hotel many years earlier, sometime around the turn of the century, and she was supposedly waiting for a man she loved. After several days alone, she died from what people believed was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I remember reading that it happened somewhere near the steps leading from the hotel down toward the beach. I was completely hooked. I must have read that brochure 5 or 6 times. Later, back in our room, my family was settling in for the evening. My dad decided to go down the hall to get a bucket of ice, and when he stepped out, he left the door cracked open. My mom, my sister, and I were each lying quietly on the beds, reading. Then, all at once, the whole atmosphere changed. I remember feeling this sudden chill move through the room, sharp enough that I actually looked up. And before I could say anything, the door slammed shut with this violent bang. Not a soft swing, not a draft nudging it closed. It slammed. Hard. Loud enough to make all 3 of us jump. A few seconds later, my dad came back and found the door shut and the 3 of us just staring at it, completely shaken. He laughed and said something like, "What happened in here? Did a ghost stop by?" And the second he said it, my stomach dropped. I was a pretty logical kid, even then, and I wanted there to be a normal explanation. I got up and tried pushing the door myself to see if maybe it had just caught the right angle, but it only drifted gently. I checked for windows, for air coming through somewhere, for anything that might explain that kind of force. But everything was closed tight. It was winter, and I remember there being a huge Christmas tree in the lobby, so there wasn't some ocean breeze blowing through the room. That night, while everyone else slept, I stayed awake, turning it over in my mind again and again. I went through every possible explanation I could think of, and none of them quite fit. I couldn't understand how that door had shut so suddenly and so hard. I still can't explain it, honestly. Maybe there was some perfectly ordinary reason, and I just never found it. But part of me has always liked to believe it was Katie, just making herself known in the gentlest way she could manage. Whatever it was, that moment stayed with me. It scared me, no question, but it also filled me with this strange excitement I've never forgotten.